Good morning. I will now call this work session for February 8th of the Polk County School Board to order. And I'm going to start by reading our Who Are We statements before I turn it over to Superintendent Hyde. So we are the Polk County Leadership Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to define us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and experiences to ensure that the decisions are focused on providing a high-quality education for all students. The four most important things to our governance team are operating with integrity, respecting our students, staff, families, and each other, establishing a culture where our stakeholders feel valued, supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth, and supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children we serve and find avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There is no acceptable alternative. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for each student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because we will remain committed to supporting the whole child. We hope to engage and empower our students and stakeholders to create a community of lifelong learners. And Superintendent Hyde, I'll turn it over to you.
Ma'am, good morning, Madam President, members of the board, staff, and community members. Thank you for being here today for the workshop. We will begin this morning with a presentation from Tobacco Free, and I'll invite Ms. Haley Cornett to please come to the front. We've been in discussions with this organization over the last few months, looking for opportunities to expand their presence and support in Polk County Public Schools, especially as we look to address issues such as vaping and or tobacco usage, as well as other forms of nicotine use amongst our teens. As many of you are aware, because you are high school, all of you have respective high schools in your areas, you know that that's one of the growing concerns amongst our population, and even amongst our student groups is the frequency in which they seem to come across others vaping. So it seemed very timely and relevant to bring them here today. So they have a brief presentation with you, and we'll talk more in the near future about expanding our partnerships with them to help address this issue by providing cessation supports for families and students, targeted training for staff, and also being able to host open forums with our students and establishing student groups. Many counties in the state of Florida have student leadership groups on their campuses that help address this. In fact, we have a young lady here at Winter Haven High School who is amongst the state of Florida, is a leader in this regard, but we don't have a club at the school, so it's an opportunity for us to look to expand our partnership further and get students involved, because let's be honest, having adults talk to you about tobacco cessation and nicotine cessation is one thing, but having your peers talk to you seems to have a greater impact and effect on them. So Haley, please take it from here. And you have control over the PowerPoint there using the mouse.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. Good morning, distinguished school board members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to sit here in front of you today and to give you all a little bit of an idea of who we are and what we do. Just for full transparency purposes, things are going to seem a little bit odd today only because due to Florida state regulations, I am not allowed to lobby elected or appointed officials, and unfortunately, my youth that Superintendent Hyde previously mentioned was unable to make it this morning due to a family emergency. So expect the unexpected, as they say, and we're gonna give you a little bit of a modified presentation this morning. So if someone could go ahead and get our presentation up.
You're gonna control it, so if you forward, there you go.
Awesome, thank you all. Okay, good morning again. Today we are here to talk about addressing the youth vaping crisis in Polk County schools and how our organization can support you all. So what will we discuss? We're going to discuss who we are, what we do. We'll talk a little bit about the Florida Youth Tobacco Survey, or FYTS as we call it in the data world. We'll talk a little bit specifically about Polk County data and what our data trends are showing. And just for you all to know a little tidbit of information, excuse me, this fiscal year and this calendar year right now in this school semester is actually when all of this data is being collected here in our schools. So your student violence and addiction prevention coordinator is actually the one facilitating all of that right now. So we hope to have some great new data in the coming months. We will also discuss the benefits of addressing vaping in schools, and then we will not be talking about recommended provisions of a K-12 tobacco policy today, but I hope that you all will take the time to review that on your own, and if you have any questions, absolutely, please contact me. All right, so who we are tobacco-free Polk. I work for an organization called Civic Communications, which is a contractor of the state of Florida. We work under the State Department of Health, the Bureau of Tobacco-Free Florida. So we're contracted with them. So we previously had these services provided under the Department of Health, and due to a grant cycle change, there are now 24 counties in the state of Florida that my organization represents and provides the tobacco prevention services for. One of our other initiatives is Students Working Against Tobacco. Here in Polk, we call it Polk SWAT. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it today, but Superintendent Hyde alluded to who she is and really what she does, not only here at the local level, but of course at the statewide level and even with the national campaign for tobacco-free kids. So some of our funded activities are actually retail point of sale. There is a new law that went into effect last October. It's called SB 1080, and what that effectively does is it prevents me from having any say or any leeway with getting any type of point of sale or tobacco-related retail licensing marketing policies passed here. So another one of our policy areas is obviously K-12 policies, and that's why I'm here standing in front of you all, or sitting, I should say, in front of you all today. And another area that we focus on is smoke-free multi-unit housing. So the way that we do our work, everything is very, very data-driven, and these policy areas come down as directives from the Bureau of Tobacco-Free Florida. So what goes on here in Polk County is not necessarily the same thing that goes on in Hillsborough County or the same thing that goes on in Osceola County. It's all a little bit different just depending on what the needs of the community are and what the data shows as far as trends and vaping usage. So why do we need this? We have a youth vaping crisis here in Polk County. So in Polk County, 1 in 6 youth ages 11 to 17 years old vape or use another toxic tobacco product. 1 in 12 report that they have vaped on school property. 1 in 4 report that they have ever tried vaping. 1 in 9 say that they usually get vaping products by buying them in a store. This is where our point of sale initiatives come in, such as a convenience store, supermarket, or gas station. And then, of course, the even more unfortunate part is that 2/3, approximately, or 61%, are exposed to secondhand smoke. Secondhand smoke being either from cigarettes or from vaping. So nicotine obviously is very, very highly addictive. These electronic vapor products, or EVPs as we call them, contain many heavy metals such as lead, nickel. They also contain chemicals such as formaldehyde, and then of course thousands of other unidentified chemicals. And the real issue with this is that right now, as far as policy and legislation is concerned, the Food and Drug Administration at the national level does not have any broad oversweeping policies or directives related to EVPs. They have not really come out to say, yes, they're better than cigarettes, or no, they're worse. So we really just don't know right now. And that's really the unfortunate part. But what we do know is we know that these products contain nicotine, and we know that nicotine is highly addictive, and we know that nicotine exposure early in life can lead to developmental problems later on. Our brain is developing up until the age of 25 years old. So to have 14, 15, 16-year-olds using these products is highly, highly concerning. Not to mention the gateway path, so to speak, of potential other substance misuse and disorders. So nicotine impacts learning. Nicotine harms parts of the brain that support learning, impulse control, mental health. And I know that we are all talking right now, obviously, about the mental health impacts of COVID-19 on children. And we need to understand that not only are children more stressed out now, they're finding other ways to cope with that stress. And we definitely don't want vaping or nicotine products to be their coping mechanism. And unfortunately, we've seen in data trends just nationally at this point that between 2019 and 2020, cigarette sales actually increased. So on the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic during the year 2020, more people were purchasing tobacco products, or more tobacco products were purchased in general. We don't really know what they are yet, but it remains to be seen. Of course, all of this to say that these products taste like candy. So each year, tobacco and vape companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars marketing their products in Florida. Most recently, I believe it was about $650 million, And their marketing schemes are not just these products that you see up here or the products that you see on power walls. A lot of their marketing actually comes in the form of kickbacks, where they sell their products, buy one, get one for 50% off, or they do those types of sales where it's like, buy 6 X amount vape pods for however much the dollar amount is. And the purpose of that is to get people to buy more products up front so that they can use those products because they've already spent the money on it to then become further addicted. So these products that taste like candy, unfortunately, back in 2009, the FDA did ban flavored cigarettes except for menthol. But right now we have no real overbroad policies that have anything to do with eliminating the flavor. And some places, in some counties and in some states, have elected to try and prevent the sale of those products at all. But really, we're just waiting for the FDA to finally come down and say, yes, we're going to view these products like any other traditional tobacco product, and yes, we are going to do something about getting them off of the market and getting them away from the hands of children. And of course, this is the part that I am not allowed to speak to you all about, but if you could review on your own time, I would greatly, greatly appreciate it, and I hope that this conversation gave you all, no pun intended, a little bit of flavor of who we are and what we do and how we can help. I know Superintendent Hyde discussed a little bit right now some cessation access. We have a partner, Central Florida AHEC, that provides cessation services either via in-person group quit or even virtual group quit to one of our neighboring school districts. So that's something that we can begin to promote to your staff and teachers now. And then, of course, the Bureau of Tobacco-Free Florida recently launched a Live Vape Free campaign, which is allowing for students to text a number and get cessation services without, the overbearing need of involving their parents and, getting it to and escalate it to a higher level. I know that some children feel like, how can I get help for this if what I'm doing is wrong? And we, of course, want to highlight that, this type of behavior is definitely not what we want to be encouraging, but we want to encourage, providing children with access to quit. So I thank you all so much for your time, and I'm really interested in working with you all moving forward, and I will now open up to any questions that you may have.
Ms. Fields.
This question is for Mr. Bridges or for Superintendent Hyde. I know we already have a tobacco policy in place. We did that some years back. So is it comprehensive as it relates to what she's presenting today? Has anybody looked at that?
I have not been privy to any conversations about that. We certainly do have a policy in place.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know, Superintendent Hyde, if it deals with vaping and all that, but I know that it's very comprehensive, so.
Yeah, we do, and I'd have to go back, and what's going to be brought back to the board at a subsequent workshop is an actual summary of what our current policy is and what additional steps the district would like to take to help address this issue. Primarily, while nicotine is an incredible concern for various reasons, and you saw some of the data and statistics here, I have a growing concern, as many of you do, as it relates to vaping in particular. Because vaping, unfortunately, more often than not, is not simply a nicotine product. It's typically a THC or other product. And the ease in which those devices can be hidden it makes it incredibly difficult to manage. There's no smell, there's typically no vape or smoke any longer, and companies have gotten incredibly sophisticated in how they hide them. For example, there are hoodies now that students can buy or people can buy where the drawstring itself is an actual vape pen. So it's not simply some big bulky thing that when they first began, or now even just the smaller vape sticks become a problem. We're also finding from time to time that young children are picking them up in their households, and they end up bringing them to school thinking, well, grandma has it or grandpa has it or mom or dad have it, and they don't bring it to school necessarily to use, but then we find out that it has THC or it has some other chemicals in it. It's incredibly alarming for our students. And so, again, there will be some enhancements, recommendations to our existing policy, more specifically to training. And I would like to see us bring back and reinstitute the student-led groups and organizations on our campuses, because I think that's a powerful opportunity for us to help address this issue.
Well, I know that there's a strong concern, as you said, with students, because when I spoke at one of the high schools, the students
ma'am.
were very concerned about the early use of vaping. So you're
Correct.
correct, there is a need to make sure that we have that as a part of our policy and do whatever we need to help address it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time. If anybody has any further questions, I will go ahead and leave some flyers and my business card for you all. Thank you all again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Judge's going to update the presentation here momentarily, but I'll go ahead and begin the transition to the next topic. The next topic on the workshop this morning is the calendar for students, staff, and teachers, and our paraeducators. This is the recommendation. It came out of the calendar committee for the 22-23 school year. If the board approves this calendar at the next meeting on February 22nd, then what we will do is create draft calendars for the next 2 years in addition, with the understanding that there could be some modifications, and we would provide timely notice to staff and families if a change were to occur. The most significant change in this schedule is the inclusion of 3 additional early release days. Right now, this would give building administrators 4 total days, half days, that they could redirect staff and provide explicit professional development. As you know, we're very fortunate to have received a very large grant. Again, kudos to Dr. Barrios and her amazing team for their submission. So we will be going one-to-one. And as you've heard me say, procuring devices and delivering them to the hands of our students and staff is the easiest part. It's expensive, but it's the easiest part of going one-to-one. The most complicated portion of this is ensuring that our staff have the knowledge and wherewithal to be effective in its utilization, because, and again, we have to provide some assurances to our families as we make that transition that students aren't, we need to address the misnomer that students will be staring at a screen all day. That is not what transitioning to a one-to-one device deployment or district-wide initiative entails. Actually, it's far more explicit, and it's far more direct, and it's about empowering students, and there's a lot to that. But we need the time to train staff on how to best do that. The other change within the calendar is we've moved all the early releases to be up against a holiday break. We've also worked to ensure that we're not coming back from a break only to subsequently go back on a half day. I think that's incredibly frustrating to families, and it's very difficult for them to manage those schedules. And so with respect, we already looked at the attendance that takes place, typically the Friday or the day immediately adjacent to a holiday, and student attendance declines, as does staff attendance in many instances as well. So with all due respect, it makes a great deal of sense to move the early release to that calendar day so that we can address those issues and provide that professional development without feeling like we're forfeiting a great deal of instructional time. So that's the recommendation coming before the board. I'll go ahead and get to the presentation now. So again, all early release days were moved to Fridays. All early release days have been intentionally moved to align with existing holidays. So as I used the example, in November, the early release will occur on a Friday immediately prior to the Thanksgiving break. The committee supported the addition of 3 early release days to be used for staff professional development. If adopted, we'll have a total of 10 early release days. 4 are reserved for us to be explicit and deliver professional development to our staff. Ms. Miller, our board member, and Ms. Ullman, a board nominee, were 2 individuals who served on the committee who could also lend their voice, and they could share some of the comments and things that they may have heard during the last committee meeting, calendar committee meeting. Ms. Miller, is there anything you wanted to add?
As a new committee member, that a lot of that work was done when I got there, but it was everybody in the room agreed that that was a much more effective use of our time. The question that I have that we were talking about, that August 10th date that we have to start schools by, because some people ask, why are we doing half days at all? Because in elementary schools, sometimes we struggle to get kids to go home, so the days are longer. But there was reference that August 10th date is why we couldn't start earlier and have less half days and take full days. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I can't talk to, so the full days creates an issue a financial impact and a calendar impact for everyone, because the full day would require that we pay staff to be present for professional development during those non-instructional times. The benefit we have now in the utilization of half-days is staff are already being compensated for those days. The reason why August 10th, and I have to bring Brian up to Mr. Warren up to the microphone, but I believe that that's statutorily directed as to when we can start and host school. There's a no sooner than and a no later than window for school districts, and I believe that we work to adhere to that. So I think, again, the justification is if we were to provide full days for professional development, it would add additional contract days as far as compensation for all of our employees. And when you think about 13,000 employees, that adds up very, very quickly. It may scale out of our realm of affordability. And so for this, too, I think many of our staff would agree that a half-day professional development opportunity is far more fruitful for them than a full day, because it's very difficult to participate in professional development for an 8-hour day and continue to remain engaged. Now, part of that we have to take responsibility for. I completely understand that the professional development has to be appropriate to the audience and to the need so that staff are engaged throughout the process. So hopefully I've addressed your question.
Yeah, you have. And there was enthusiasm for this because of low attendance on our half-days anyway, to match them with the day before the holiday where there's already low attendance. Plus, it gives the teachers, that freedom of usually to do more things in the classroom and what they need to do running up on those holidays. I know that parents, I think when I can talk in the community, they're much more accepting of this than those midweek breaks, which are very difficult for childcare. So overall, I think the committee was very receptive of this idea, and I hope to see this continue as we renew the calendars. If there's a statutory change, because we've talked about that August 10th date before, and some people think we should lobby to change that, then we would address it in the upcoming calendars.
I think keep in mind, too, that part of the reason that date exists is to ensure, and it is primarily a high school and middle school issue, is to ensure that final exams are completed before winter break, as it's unfair to send students home and assume that they're going to study and then come back and take their assessments post-holiday. The other one is graduation. In order for a lot of our students to submit their college applications, they're reliant upon their transcript, and so our ability to produce a semester one transcript for those students puts them in the best, most competitive position for their college submissions. And some of our students are early graduates. Some of our students may not require a second semester. So you're absolutely right. I understand. There's nationally there's been an argument, having worked in another state. Why can't we start after Labor Day versus that's what they do up north? And well, there's reasons they do that because of temperature and climate and weather and other factors. But this is one of those things. If the state changes it and the board has an interest in us modifying our start date, absolutely, we're receptive to that. We would just have to work as aggressively as we can to maintain that semester one break before the winter holiday.
Thank you.
Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you. Couple of comments
Ms. Forney.
to address what you just indicated. There was a time when Polk County Public Schools did not complete the first semester in December. And the overwhelming comments to me from area counselors trying to get children ready for college truly gave our students the inability to compete with other kids around the country who did finish in December that could get the transcripts and stuff ready to send out to colleges. So I had several of them, contact me directly through the years and said, we need to get this changed, and we finally did. So once I understood the reason for that, I'm very supportive because our children need that opportunity to be on the same level playing field as other kids around the country that are competing for spots on college campuses all over the U.S. So, first thing. Second thing is, I just want to do a shout out to June Ullman. I appointed June. I think she's been on the committee almost as long as I've been on the board. Very faithful, always attends and cares, because she understands, having raised 4 of her own children, how important it is that the calendar, work, and to hear and to see, because I printed it out this morning. It's just wonderful that these extra days were moved from Wednesday, middle of the week, which is a nightmare for parents, to the end of the week. I think is fabulous. So just a whole shout out. to June in particular for your service for all these years. I appreciate you being so diligent. And then secondly, to the whole committee for realizing that when things just don't make sense, by goodness, if it's broke, please do fix it. Look at ways that we can make it work for both the students, families, and teachers, of course. So just want to say thank you. I love the new calendar. So thank you. And I'm very pro if we can look at the following years and begin to start to formulate that understanding, of course, that as time goes on, those dates can change as we move forward. But it would be nice. We used to have a 3-year rolling calendar years ago, so it would be nice to get back to that. So thank you, sir, very much. Appreciate it.
Ms. Fortney and then Ms. Fields.
Yeah, I was going to say about the same thing about testing out before semester, but I wanted you to go back to the reference on paying staff for half-days versus whole days. We're talking, I just wanted to clarify, we're talking pre-planning days before the 10th, correct?
No.
Okay.
So I believe if I understood Ms. Miller's question, and she had posed this to me previously, do we derive more benefit by having a fully released day, that's a
Gotcha,
professional
okay.
development day,
I just
versus
wanted
a
to
half
clarify
day?
that.
And so the difference would be, students, we are still required under statute to provide the specified number of instructional days to students. To create a full-day professional development opportunity means that we would have to extend the school year, but by virtue, we're essentially adding that as a contract payday
I just
for staff. And again, when you look at the number of staff we have, that gets very expensive very quickly.
Yes, I just want to make sure everybody understood. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Ms. Fields?
I guess my question would be, going to early release on a Friday that could possibly cause more staff to be out, correct?
Potentially. We'd have to look again. We tried to move these to days where we did not see high absenteeism for staff in particular. But yes, we could, and we could track that, and that could be a modification that occurs in the future if we saw that pattern.
I would think that we would do that. I come from my eyes are a little bit different because of my work at Girls Inc.
Yes, ma'am.
And what I hear often from parents is, why early release? And why so often? And so trying to explain it to them. And so now we're adding some additional early release days. And it kind of goes back to what Ms. Miller was saying about 4 days. Parents say they'd rather for the kids to have a full day than to be having to make arrangements for early release days. And I understand about the money factor and all that. I don't know who's on the committee, but it would be nice to know that. And I think it'd be good if you had someone on the committee from a nonprofit organization that could bring their perspective to the table for whatever it's worth.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I don't know how many parents are on the committee. I'm sure there are quite a few, but again, if you can provide that list, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Warren will give me that list, and we'll get that to the board. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're
And the
welcome.
other question that I had, I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it anyway. Spring break is now a week early, if I'm looking at this correctly.
Mr. Warren?
And why is it a week early? Because it's typically always the third week in March.
It is 1 week earlier, and with respect to the reason why, before the committee elected to discuss moving it up 1 week, we reviewed, I believe it was 5 or 6 contiguous districts around our area relative to what their calendars were. And upon that review, the committee elected that it would be best to align with what other districts in our area are doing as well.
Yeah, that's good, because that was a question that I was hoping the answer would be,
Yes, ma'am.
because a lot of our families work in Orlando and Tampa.
Mhm.
And so it'd be nice for everybody to be on the same schedule. So
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
good. Thank you.
Dr. Allen, I saw your hand go up.
Great, yeah, I was just going to say, it was good to, hear some history on the calendar committee. And I'm probably with Ms. Fields as well. I'm just thinking about, both parents working and so forth. If we add 3 extra days, what does that look like? So I would like to see what the committee makeup was as well. So I'm just curious, how parent perspectives are presented to the committee. Are there parents currently on the committee? Just some of those questions, I was curious. And then the vote count, like what was the outcome of the committee decision?
I can say that from the committee perspective, it was unanimous that this was the recommendation. There was no disagreement. There was no one who felt something differently. In fact, I think overwhelmingly they were excited at the opportunity. Some had requested we go to early release every week like some other districts do, or every other week like other districts do. I'm not supportive of that at this time. I think we need to maintain as much instructional momentum as we can. And that's one of the reasons, again, why we moved it to be contiguous with holiday breaks. So what you find is that in a lot of months where ordinarily we would have an early release that would essentially, may not even make sense. You come back from a holiday and 2 days later you're on an early release again. You know, we've moved that to create as much continuity of instruction as possible. Brian, since the question has come up twice, could you come back to the microphone, Mr. Warren, and share with them who, you know, basically what's the committee comprised of, which individuals?
Thank you. If you wanted to follow along or click on the link there in your board docs, the executive summary, I'm going to read directly from there. The superintendent's calendar committee is comprised of about 35 members. They represent the school board, the community, employee, and staff representatives from Polk Education Association, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the district office, regional administrators, and principals. Also represented is assessment accountability and administration offices, business process support, finance department, human resource services, and information services, as well as payroll and support services, transportation division. It really is a all hands on deck interdepartmental review, as well as including those folks that are outside of our organization and your representatives as well that are at the table. And to Mr. Hyde's remark, it was a very collegial, collaborative discussion. I appreciated the fact that we had folks that were Zooming in, joining us each time. They were very engaged. As we went through month by month, we would ask for feedback. You know, is there any discussion or dissension or suggestions that we wanted to discuss before moving forward? And on each of the items that's presented to you today, we did have unanimous support to bring this calendar to you today.
Ms. Miller?
Mr. Warren, I learned a lot just from the accountability department and with the principals talking about testing days. So I know that played a factor in high schools when they have to get testing completed. So I appreciate being a part of that. I just learned a lot about the planning of student assessments, which is a lot to do with how we do these days off.
There's a lot of moving pieces with the various representatives that are in the room at that time relative to the number of student contact days and minutes, the testing calendars, the principals providing input for what would help them, you know, relative to returning from breaks or what's upcoming for assessments or otherwise. So you really do end up with a product that's before you representative of a collaborative approach of all the members that I've highlighted for you today.
Ms. Fortney?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I thought you saw you. Okay. No further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the calendar will come before the board at the February 22nd meeting for approval. To Ms. Fields' question, we'll do some additional analysis to look at those dates, but we'll make sure, even though Mr. Warren provided the list of participants, we'll get you a comprehensive list. So when we talk about community members, how many of those were parents, how many of those were appointees, and Ms. Fields will definitely seek an opportunity to see if we can be inclusive of some of our non-profits if they're not already involved. But I'll get that list from Mr. Warren.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to bring Steve Cochran back up to the microphone to provide an update, just as he prepares to deliver his presentation. Just so the board members are aware, we've had 2 community follow-up meetings, both in the East Adult Learning Community and in the West Adult Learning Community. I participated in both virtually, and I believe that they were able to successfully address every question that was asked. To the point, I believe we have a great deal of support moving forward for the recommendation at this time, but Mr. Cochran, it's all yours.
Good morning. The last time I was here, there were some questions that the board asked me to bring back with answers, and I have them here today, and they're integrated into the presentation. And because it's been a couple weeks, I'm going to briefly go over some of those slides, and then we'll hit that new information right away. So one of the reasons that we are doing, recommending this move is the declining enrollment at the centers. Additionally, Again, this is not a local phenomenon, it's not a state phenomenon, it's a national phenomenon. We have our internal competition, which from Grad Academy or from Fresh Start. We have competition from outside the school system, New Beginnings, and other private agencies that work with students to help get them GED diplomas. Our biggest challenge is how to provide the best integrated educational training program for our GED students and our ESOL students at our adult schools. The Integrated Educational Training Program is an initiative by the state to make sure that we not only provide academic services to these students, but we also provide vocational and training opportunities for them. Just a review of how the enrollment has been declining statewide. A snapshot of our enrollment. We were asked at the last meeting to bring the second semester enrollment, and you can see that it kind of goes up and down, but the numbers on the previous slide show that there is still a consistent decrease in enrollment. This map is an addition that we added showing some of the high population centers. This one is for East area and where they draw from. And you can see we have a very large number in the Davenport area. That number will continue to increase. What we have basically done in recommending this move is shifted the focus of our services more to the east. However, I do want to reiterate, and this was brought up at a couple of the community meetings, we are going to continue to provide service to every community. We have satellite classes, we will continue to develop those, and we will put a satellite class wherever one is needed or called for. Again, our plan is to relocate our adult programs to our technical colleges, fold in the staff with the technical colleges, turn the assistant principals at the adult schools into assistant directors. This will allow us to be more fiscally slimmer. And we are also recommending that we move our adult cap from 18 to 1 from 25 to 1. That is not, I do want to say that 18 to 1 is not a state recommendation. That is something that we had imposed upon ourselves. And consistently, our adults show up for their classes because they have life and children and other things that get in the way, work, but they tend to attend at a rate of about 50% of the time. So the plan for the facilities that would be left, West Area Adult School would be turned over to Ms. Usher in the Facilities Department. East Area Adult School would become the new Real Academy, which would allow us to free up space at Auburndale High School, which they are currently taking up. These are our numbers for our satellite programs. This is as current as of 2 weeks ago. I do want to make a note that the Mulberry Redlands Christian Migrant Association shows 0 right now. We are committed to getting back in there. Unfortunately, we've had a problem with hiring a teacher to provide that service, but we are continuing to work at bringing a teacher in there. We think it's very important, and when we talk about going to our students, that is a place that we want to be. That's where our students are at. The personnel plan for West Area Adult School, I'm glad to say that we've had some initial meetings with all of the staff together and have come up with some plans. These are currently just in discussion, but it looks like that at West, the guardian that would be displaced may be able to travel with the school because Travis does have an opening for a guardian. Additionally, because Travis needs a test coordinator, and some teachers will be retiring at West Area Adult School, we may not have to displace a teacher from that school. So none of the teaching staff will be displaced. East Area Adult School, again, we're working on those numbers, and right now, it says here on the slide that we would have 3 teachers displaced. Right now, we're working on 2, and we're trying to bring that number down to 0. So we're trying to find potential homes for these displaced teachers and keep them in the multiple pathways and serving our adult students.
Ms. Fortney?
Question was asked.
Ms. Fortney?
To the East Area Adult School, the first set of bullets where it says para network manager, that's to be kept, or is that to be lost?
That is correct. The para network manager would currently be kept, and additionally, we are looking at a way to keep the other para because of the specific talents that para brings. That para has been expertly trained on giving the CASAS test, and it's a skill that we don't want to leave. So again, when we merge these staffs, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to absorb that paraprofessional.
I do too, because I worry about the displacement. Thank you.
It's on my radar.
Ms. Miller?
I was going to wait till the end, but regarding the displacements, I appreciate you looking at this, and I want to make sure there are teachers that work, like you just said, with specific areas or expertise, and I don't want to, I know we have to, if there's not enough students or we're having to displace, I know by contract we have to go by seniority, but some of these specialized areas, if you have a teacher who's working with that program or with, in my world, with students with disabilities, I would hate to lose someone based on seniority, but they're carrying an expertise that that school needs. So that would be my concern. And I appreciate the meetings that you had, especially with the city government. Auburndale feels like this is a service to their community, so assuring them that they're still going to have classrooms there and teachers there in Auburndale to serve that specific community, I think helped with this transition.
Thank you, Ms. Miller, and thank you for being there.
It was quick.
There was a question asked about the Real Academy food service because they would need to be fed from Auburndale High School. We've met with the nutrition department. They are already planning to purchase a van for additional summer lunch schedules, so they're going to just park that van there. So this is not an additional cost. This was a van they were already planning on purchasing. We would purchase the coolers. When I say we, I've talked about the multiple pathways. We'll purchase the coolers for transport. The gas was considered to be insignificant because it was under a mile from the campus, and there were no additional personnel will need to be hired because those additional personnel that feed Real already exist at Auburndale High School, so they will just travel with the van and feed the students. A note about the integrated educational training. We do have 2 programs going now, a ServSafe Handler Certificate and a Microsoft Office Certificate. Currently, 11 students have completed the ServSafe program for ABE and 7 GED. And I want to point out, while we're very proud that what we provided, these are actually very minimal levels of service for the IET program. I included in today's presentation, and it would be part of the information that you would have access to online, an example from the state of the model programs throughout the state. They have architecture and construction, health science, and transportation and distribution. These are all substantial programs that not only lead to a industry certificate, but if a student were to complete the program, they'd be eligible to go on to post-secondary opportunities. As of today, we are meeting with the Florida Institute for Professional Development of Adult Educators to work on developing more substantial IET programs here in Polk County so that we will make this model list next year. So some of the areas that we plan on developing are in logistics, HVAC, welding, building construction, and we may develop other IET programs based on student interest. We are working on scholarships for the post-secondary tuition costs, and we are currently working on developing some better marketing materials to get the information out there that we have a IET program for the students in Polk County.
Ms. Fortney?
Is this where we would work in the internship with our own maintenance staff, HVAC, et cetera, or no?
That is another internship program that we're working on. We have a agreement with an organization called ACT, which is acting as a pre-apprenticeship program.
Okay.
And we met with Ms. Usher on that last week, and there are currently, I believe, 42 students enrolled in that program. They had to be identified at the beginning of this school year, and they are developing through and learning pre-apprenticeship skills. And then at the end of the school year, we hope to place them in not just jobs in the district, but throughout the county.
Thank you.
So we are on our next steps, and we've updated the staff at both schools. We've met with our stakeholders, both in person and virtually, at East and West Area Adult School. And we feel that we are ready to make this move for the students of Polk County, and that it will be in their best interest to provide the brunt or the substantial amount of our adult education at our technical colleges.
Ms. Wyatt and Ms. Fields?
To Ms. Fortney's point, is there anything that we can do with some of these programs that do align with our departments at the district to maybe see if we can get some of our adult students working part-time for us maybe as they're completing their certificates in the adult programs?
We certainly can look at developing that, and today is a perfect day for me to bring that up because we're having our first meeting with the Association of Adult Educators, and I would like to talk to them, see if there's another county doing something like that, and if not, figure out a way to do it ourselves.
I'm just thinking if we have people looking at logistics, is there a way that Rob could help plug them in to look at some of our logistics on, working in that department, if there's positions that we have available, maybe to grow our own and convince them they want to work here when they've finished their certificates.
We will continue to look at the best ways that we can make connections for our adult educators, and I think that's an excellent idea.
Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
When the presentation was made last time, Superintendent Hyde, one of the things that I asked you is, were we going to ensure that none of our staff were displaced? And you said that we would. And Mr. Cochran is saying, if I'm hearing him correctly, that he's going to try not to have anyone displaced. So is that some might get displaced, or are we going to do everything within our ability to make sure that these folks that's listed as possible being displaced find a place somewhere?
So they will all be placed. I thank you for asking because it's a point of clarification. Being displaced from program doesn't mean you're displaced from the school district in your employment. We have more than enough vacancies for any of those positions to place them back in other schools, other programs. What Mr. Cochran is speaking of is based off the change, there may not be spaces for those individuals within these two specific programs, but he's working to address that both through attrition and through natural attrition with people retiring and or individuals who may pursue other options because of its proximity to their home or other issues that they may run into. They may choose voluntarily to take a different role in another building. So as far as being displaced from program, there may be, as he pointed out, a few people who were displaced from the adult ed program, but they would be reassigned to existing vacancies. And in many instances, Mr. Warren and I have talked about this, giving them choices so that if they can actually be part of identifying where they'd like to go if they can't be at this program. So everybody will continue to be employed. It's just a matter of what program they will support moving forward. So we're doing the best we can, as he pointed out, to make sure everybody can stay within program, but there are some instances where the recommendation may be to reassign them.
And I appreciate that. I think it needs to be better explained and clarified, because displaced, when people hear displaced, in their mind, that means they're not going to have employment.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
understand what you're saying. I just think it needs to be clearer.
Absolutely. A lot of people think RIF, right? That reduction in force kind of thing where they're being released. But we have enough open vacancies, and we would work to make sure everybody's reassigned. So we can absolutely provide that clarification to staff.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms.
I-
Fortney and then Ms. Miller.
I apologize for not making that clearer.
No,
And,
sir, you're fine.
well, words are important. And I feel very confident, I've talked to Brian, that everyone will be placed. My priority is trying to keep the people that want to be with the program.
Thank you.
Ms. Fortney?
Just to follow up on that, do we still have something contractually with staff that if they, let's say that I teach at Bartow High School and I get displaced to Lake Gibson High School, if I don't take that job because of travel, is there any repercussion for that, or do you give me a second alternative?
Well, the answer, no. So specific to your question, if there are limited vacancies and you are reassigned and you choose not to take that reassignment, then you are essentially, to a great extent, separating service from the school district because
That-
you've been
That's what
given
I
an
wanted to
opportunity.
clarify.
But that's not a fair question, and that's
Okay.
what I'm trying to clarify even further. The fair question is, at this point, we have enough vacancies across
Right.
the school district that there are plenty of choices for individuals. And again, that's not even taking into consideration voluntary transfers that may occur, which create even more opportunities. In many instances, what we would do is try and place somebody in the best position we have available with the understanding that should a subsequent position open up, that we would work with PEA and work with HR to reassign them further. So again, the goal is not to be punitive in any way towards our employees, but if someone were to refuse an assignment, I'd have to defer back to our current contract. But in most instances, based off my historical understanding of this, refusing an assignment is akin to resignation. However, there may be other opportunities where they say, we'd have to work through that, but I don't anticipate that being an issue for anyone involved.
I didn't want to be unfair, Mr. Hyde.
No,
I just
ma'am.
wanted to bring it out there.
It's a good question, but it requires clarification because again, there are plenty of opportunities
Number
within the
two,
district.
what Ms. Wyatt was talking about, that's exactly what we have been discussing with our HVAC maintenance right there by Travis. I would love to see that happen. And my other third concern, again, goes back out to Ridge and transportation. And so I was on a call with a different group out of Lakeland, and Citrus Connection was there, and she followed up. And they are trying to get with operations to see if they have the ability to make a specific stop at Travis also. So I wanted to share that, because they already do service Ridge, but they have one that goes by Travis. So, just put that, I'll tell you who that is, et cetera, if you'd like to know.
We've already met with them several times, but they're not reliant on us approving a stop for them.
Right.
They
But
have
they
the
just needed to
authority.
know it was needed.
They have the authority, and we've been working with them actually to expand student transportation, and there are some successes there where essentially not only will a parent now be able to see where their child's bus stop is and their current bus pickup time and bus number and focus, but there'll also be a link there. So in that case, let's take a high school student who may not have a car but wants to participate in after-school activities. They'll be able to click on that link, and they'll see the Citrus Connection website, which would tell them the times in which buses run and at what location in proximity to our campuses they are. So we have continued to expand our partnership with them, but we can definitely let them know that we have an interest in having a stop there.
I just sent you the email.
So
Thank you.
I
Yes,
would
sir.
forward it to Rob.
I would like to state that it would be better to have the stop directly at Travis, but currently it does stop at Polk State, which is extremely close.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Ms. Miller and then Dr. Allen.
I want to talk about, because the next thing on the agenda is school leadership. And I know we've made changes to both of the people that lead East Area and West Area of what their jobs will be or their job category description. And I'm assuming these programs will grow. My hope is that they grow, especially that east side with that Davenport area needing this kind of service. They're not listed in school leadership positions, but we have made changes to them. You've mentioned assistant director. The last thing we had in writing were directors. Can you talk about what that's going to look like?
He cannot. That's not his recommendation. That comes later in the presentation today when we talk about superintendent's HR recommendations. So the recommendations were to move those individuals to director level positions as commensurate with their duties and responsibilities and the number of staff they supervise. So that's the change that's recommended for them. That's not coming back before you today because there were no subsequent questions as to those positions at the last meeting. The only questions that came up were about school level administrative positions because the recommendations were to move some of our program administrators to principals. So what you'll see here, because there's no vote today, is the answers to those questions in item number 6 today, and then I'll bring it back at the February 22nd meeting for all of the approvals for all of the positions that were listed previously.
I guess I consider them school leaders. So when I saw school leadership positions, I was concerned what we were doing with them because it's been.
But there were no questions related to those the last meeting.
So this is from questions related, not all school leadership positions that we're
That's
changing.
correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
Thank you.
Dr. Allen.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. Big vision, and really, I'm going to support this. This is huge. I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's looking towards the future, which we need to be doing in this conversation. Just within the last 2 weeks, I think Forbes had that article that talked about there were 1 million less students enrolled in college. So I think adult education will be a continual conversation. I think it's hard to see that there's been a dip of 39%, I think it was, in GED completion and that's the state of Florida, is that right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's hard. So, but I do like the idea that we're consolidating and, maybe we can see a turn in that. And again, I would equate the 39% decline as related to the change that was made in the GED in 2015. So I was just curious, because I'm thinking, okay, we're pouring all this infrastructure into our academies, and we've got top-notch academies, right? So if we see adult students trickling in that, triculation from high school to potentially more technical certification and so forth, what's your thought process on that as we look at the successful programs, and if they don't pursue college or university and they want that technical pathway, how do we get them from there to, Ridge or Travis? To me, bells and whistles are an important part of the conversation as well. Travis needs, and I'll continue to speak this, so I would love to see a renovation in Travis. I know we're putting portables there to sustain the consolidation and so forth, but I'd love for us to continue to have that conversation because we're going to have students that are going to want to leave this beautiful academy with all the top-notch facilities we were having in high school, and we get them to Travis or Ridge. But some thoughts on that, vision-wise. How do we determine these programs, as far as concentrations as well, and what do you see down the road for other options and concentrations?
Well, 2 areas that we're working on developing right now are cybersecurity, which we have 1 class going in the district right now at Summerlin Academy, and logistics, another area that we're developing at the secondary level. We're working with Auburndale High School to bring in a local business to assist us in developing a logistic program there. We had 2 in the district. They're very teacher-driven. They were not very successful. We feel like this is going to be a more successful marriage of a partnership between the business, the school, and the instructor. We feel like we have a very strong instructor. So those are 2 areas that we don't have many opportunities for students right now, but we're working on developing. Now, as for how do we get our students from our academies to our great technical colleges, well, we work each year, and probably not in the past 2 years, but counselors identify students who have not expressed an interest in college, We try to provide buses from the multiple pathways, or financed by the multiple pathways department, from the local high schools to Travis or Ridge, depending on which one is their feeder pattern. Get them in there, present them all of the opportunities that we have. Additionally, we encourage our instructors to talk about, make those connections within the classroom about how they can continue their education there. And I should say, if it's a program that we don't have, but our great partners at Polk State or Florida Southern have, we try to direct the students in that direction too.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next item on the agenda are community updates. I don't get the same opportunity I feel that board members do to talk about things going on in your respective districts, and it's important for me to highlight some things, especially as I spend more and more time attending some of our events in our schools, and I'll provide a better title to this than community events. But, I wanted to really celebrate the Polk County Youth Fair, and this will be something that we will lend our voice to moving forward. I know it's a great passion point of Ms. Bird's. She was there bidding on plants and other things along with my wife and Ms. Winchester on the last Friday of the fair. So she continues to have an investment there, and it's great to see her out at events still. But what the Youth Fair has reported is outside of the livestock and the plant auction and some of those things, we've seen an overall diminishment in student participation in many of the crafts and other submissions. And part of that's largely due to COVID. I think everybody understands that there's been a reluctance on behalf of some of our students to invest that much time in something to basically submit a project that may ultimately get canceled because of COVID numbers. And so I remain committed to the Polk County Youth Fair to ensure that we're, again, lending our voice to this and encouraging our staff to encourage kids to participate. It was such an amazing event, and I was very fortunate to be there on a Friday evening to hand out ribbons along with Ms. Fortney and Ms. Miller. And, we purchased some plants ourselves, and it was just a great opportunity. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll share, we don't have the total numbers yet as far as how much money was raised, because we're still waiting on the final numbers from the livestock auction that took place, or excuse me, I should say the cattle auction that took place on Friday evening, along with the plant auction. But I will say that on the Tuesday alone, they raised nearly $600,000 on auctioning off. And all that money goes back to our students and allows them, they typically secure those dollars and use it for scholarships and things of that nature. But I'd like to also point out, and I'll provide the board with their names, but there are individuals in our community that are so invested in this and so invested in our children. They spend in excess of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 every year at the fair. I mean, when we arrived, they were backing up trailers and loading them with plants. $30,000 in plants were purchased by this one gentleman, and he does it every single year. And it's that kind of commitment. And the individuals who run that fair, they essentially live on site for 12 consecutive days. Because when you have livestock and you have these kinds of things taking place, it is 24/7. Taking care in case there's emergencies and medical issues and other issues that arise, and just protecting the animals and making sure they're well taken care of and fed. And I tell you, the outpouring of support that was there was so amazing. And kudos to everybody involved, and it was so exciting to see our kids get recognized. I think Ms. Fortney and Ms. Miller would also attest to the fact that some of our students won so many prizes that when they came up, they were literally holding 5 or 6 trophies and belt buckles and everything. I was jealous. I was envious of the belt buckles myself. But just the sense of pride they had, and to give them an opportunity to come up, be recognized, take a picture, it was just an awesome event, and very proud of our students. But it is definitely something we will continue to get behind and partner with, because it's part of our Polk County heritage, let's be honest, and it's a legacy that we want to sustain. And I'm a firm believer that the more children get involved in activities such as this, scouting, other opportunities, especially anything dealing with animal husbandry, the level of empathy and the responsibility that they learn over time is truly important, and it has a lifelong impact on them. So what a great opportunity for them. We also listed all of the different submissions there by department, so you can kind of get a sense of how many of our students participate. There were 401 students who entered the hog competition, and I know for some people, Ms. Fortney was very dismayed to learn that pork chops come from
Listen,
from
I just
hogs.
said I get mine from Publix. I don't need to see the whole thing, okay?
So-
And your wife was the same way, let me clarify.
My wife was the same way. But just, again, I was truly impressed. And having come from the Midwest recently, where this is a huge opportunity for our kids as well, I would tell you that the Polk County Youth Fair really stands out. I'd also like to acknowledge that there are multiple other fairs that our students participate in, including the state fair that happens in Tampa, but there's a subsequent fair that's happening in outside of Plant City, and in some instances, because of age restrictions, or if a hog or something didn't qualify. So in order to submit a hog or pig for the Polk County Youth Fair, it has to fall within a certain weight range. And if it didn't fall within that range, they can get a subsequent opportunity to partner at the Plant City one and then also go to state. So again, great opportunities for our kids and so well attended, and it was a fabulous evening, albeit a little chilly. I'd also like to give a shout out to Mr. Cochran and many of our ROTC programs. I got to go to Summerlin Academy and watch the air rifle competition. Very, very impressive, watching those students. So they basically get 20 shots using the air rifles. And Summerlin Academy has, truly, in my understanding, the most enviable indoor range in all of Polk County, and quite honestly, in many of our surrounding counties, because every ROTC instructor said, I'd like to see us have a range like this. So I said, yes, I hear you all. We'll figure out how to make that happen. Some shoot outside, some shoot in cafeterias right now. But I will say, watching those students, they have a specified, they're on the clock. They have to complete all their shots within a specified period of time, but there's an electronic range, and it captures all of their shots and where they impacted the target in real time, and then they calculate a total score. And then up on the board, it gives them an understanding of what their total score equates to, because some of those would be national qualifying scores. And there was a young girl, a young lady, who had already shot, and I saw she had a 511 total points, which put her in a range just below the national competition range. And she was just so excited. But to see our students participate, it was a great activity, and something obviously all of our schools and ROTC programs are committed to. So first place was Summerlin Academy, second place went to Mulberry, third place went to Ridge, fourth place went to Auburndale, and fifth place went to Haines City. These 5 teams will now travel in April to go to the state level competition in Cape Coral. So we're excited for them. We wish them the best of luck. But what a great opportunity for our kids, and just to watch them shoot, and the skill set that they have. It's not, having grown up with BB guns and things, this is not that. This is a whole other level of sophistication. And the patience that they exhibited was quite impressive. Pig Fest. Again, many of you were at Pig Fest. I know that Ms. Fields was there, although our paths did not cross. Many others were there. I know Miss Wendy Dodge was there, volunteering her time to support Girls Inc. and others, and so was Marcus and many others. But I want to give a shout out to George Jenkins. And again, I always have a little bit of caution when I acknowledge George Jenkins, because my son goes there. And I don't want people thinking I have a favorite. But they're the only school team, barbecue team in our entire district, although it's a growing interest. I'm excited to hear that. But they placed 7th overall out of 43 teams in barbecue. 7th overall. There were national competitive teams who participated in this event. They took 2nd place in the rib category, which led me to question why they're not catering events for us more frequently. But they will be in the very near future. I've already spoken to the teacher and others involved. They took 16th place in chicken, 13th place in pork, and 11th place in brisket. And they were very proud to tell me that they were just 0.6 of a point away from 10th place. What an amazing accomplishment for a group of teenagers at a high school. And for those of you who don't understand barbecue competitions, and I've never done one, but when I retire, maybe. But this is an all-night event. You have to tend to the equipment and to your product throughout the entire evening to make sure that everything is done right by the time you have to turn in your submissions for judges. And what was really challenging about this year's event was the cold weather. And actually, several teams withdrew because they couldn't maintain their smokers and at the appropriate temperature to be able to turn in a submission, so they ended up not turning in something. But it was a great event. I'm very proud of our kids. And these are programs that I think quite often, sometimes more often than not, because it's a small program, would go overlooked. And having been there, didn't get to sample their food, but I was very proud of them, as we should be. But this is also a good example of some of the amazing staff we have in our schools that are looking for non-traditional ways to engage our kids in fun activities that fulfill their time. And I know that the school is excited, and they're actually lobbying me to see if we can't host our own high school level barbecue challenge here in Polk County. So we're excited to work towards that. But I did want to take the opportunity to congratulate them. And then unfortunately, I did not make it to Saturday's event. Mr. Cochran and I were talking about this, but we just held our event over at Ridge Academy, if I'm correct. Was that correct, sir? Yes, that's correct. And it was for our health services, our health key teams competition. And so we had teams from across the state come here and compete. We're very proud of our students, and I'll provide a better update on that at the next subsequent meeting. And this is just a small sampling of the things I've been getting to, but just an exciting time to celebrate really what we're focused about, right? We should always be focused on our kids. Ms. Fields and then Ms. Fortney.
So I had an opportunity to tour the kitchen of the George Jenkins High School barbecue team, and from what I understand, that was donated to them, I believe. But it is amazing, and they're talking about maybe getting some other high schools to do the same thing. So maybe next year at PicFest, there'll be an additional high school that will compete. And I believe there were 2 of our employees. I know Mr. Townley was one. I don't remember the other gentleman's name that's involved. But the students were excited. I didn't get to taste anything either, but the proof is in the pudding, and what they got is recognition is amazing to me. So congratulations to them as well.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney.
Yeah, bingo, what Ms. Field said. And I really appreciate you highlighting Summerlin, George Jenkins, Mulberry, District 3, Rocks. Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of that staff and those students.
And knowing how competitive the board is, I'll make sure I highlight something from each of your regions in the future.
That would be nice, but good luck.
All right, moving on. There were some subsequent follow-up questions that the board asked me to review as it related to the school-level leadership position recommendations. To Ms. Miller's point, I should have clarified this further. This was related to certain specific programs. And so, if you recall correctly, the initial proposal was to move several of these back to a principal-level position, with the exception of CFAA, until such time as she completed our educational leadership pipeline program and became eligible. Again, questions that were raised by the board was, does the enrollment for the program justify a principal's level position? Because we have schools that have principals, and is this program going to be sufficient in size that we would justify that? And I think that raises another question. How set apart from the actual overall campus is the program to essentially maybe justify an independent leader? Or staff shared, or facilities shared. There are some great standouts. Summerlin Academy, while on the overall high school, which is across the street from the high school campus, has its own dedicated campus. And while Harrison does share some classroom spaces at Lakeland, by and large, most, if not all, of the performing arts classes are held on their own portion of a dedicated campus. The other questions that came up was, does creating the position of a principal create issues with others who serve larger groups and get paid less? And potentially the answer is yes. It does create some concern. I did spend 2 days speaking with many of our building level principals, and the question that came up most frequently amongst our principals, and our school district used to do this, and it is something that we are currently exploring, is how do we differentiate pay based off the number of students that are being served by particular school level principals? Or by need, by programmatic need, or those types of things that they support. And that was a process we used to have a number of years ago. So we're looking at what other districts are doing to compensate school-level leaders differently, again, based off enrollment size, based off need, based off specificity of program. But that is something we're looking at in the future. In particular, creating a dual principal, I think some of the questions and concerns that were raised were valid concerns related to, ultimately, at the end of the day, who's the boss? Especially in programs that they're not cleanly divided. So if a staff member teaches half their day in a program, a specific program, but then teaches the other half of their day in the rest of the school building, if they question their evaluation, can they then lobby the other principal to give them a better evaluation? And it can create conflict, and it can create all kinds of issues, especially when it comes down to scheduling and whatnot. So how do we prevent issues and conflicts from arising between principals? And right now, we're very fortunate that we have great working relationships between these individuals, but that's always going to change. It's always going to be subject to change based off retirements, based off promotions, based off other opportunities. There's always the opportunity for that to erode and become problematic in the future. And again, as I shared, the question of who ultimately is in charge. Another good example, other than staff evaluation, would be student discipline. At the end of the day, who ultimately has the final say-so as it relates to student discipline or an academic concern or any other litany of complaints that can happen involving our students? And what other options exist was the final question that was asked. So I did go back and came up with another, let me refresh or take a step back. I did provide you with the enrollment update, just so you're aware, and this does not reflect the change. I apologize, because, I'm sorry, Summerlin is in there. So I added Summerlin Academy, IB, Cambridge, Haines City IB, Kathleen High School CFAA, Tenor Rock High School's Cambridge program, and Lakeland High School's Harrison Fine and Performing Arts School. We gave you the total enrollment for the overall campus. We gave you the total number of students presently enrolled in the program, and we provided you a percentage of the overall school enrollment to give you a kind of a breakdown. Obviously, Harrison's the standout with the greatest number of students and percentage of participants in the program itself, with Kathleen being the next highest. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Miller.
I have a question. And I know we talked about students enrolled in programming, and some of these programs are relatively new. So 2 questions. If a program was to change, does that person follow, or what would we do with the person that we give this title to?
Could you clarify, meaning if the program went away or if the program?
If the program goes away?
If the program goes away, then there would be a modification to return them back to a traditional schedule.
And so I think, I'm looking at this overall. I mean, we're talking about comparing Harrison, which is a standalone building, and students to programs, small programs within other high schools. Like, does this need to be done in one? Can they be looked at separately, or they all have to be done as this next level?
I think my argument would be we do them all comprehensively.
Okay.
I think the question that you're really that we're going to have to get to is how do we increase enrollment in some of these programs? Tenor Rocks will grow. Tenor Rocks will grow
Well, it's
because
relatively new, so we have to grow it.
Cambridge is new. There may be some opportunities for us to do some things with zoning that I've mentioned previously. But Tenor Rock is also getting another program that would also be assigned to this administrator, and that would be the 3DE program in conjunction with Junior League and others. So I think it's important, or not Junior League, Junior Achievement, thank you. So I think it's important to note that that program will grow. CFAA is relatively large. But again, there's opportunities here. I think, Ms. Miller, to your point, how do we grow the enrollment and participation in these programs? Because it's clear that the need is there and the opportunities exist.
Thank you.
Based off the comments and the questions and the requests of the board, I did work up a modified proposal. So rather than the position title of principal, which would eliminate the concerns related to who ultimately is in charge, we would give them, as we currently do, operational autonomy. I think it's important to clarify that in most instances that we've been asked, well, we need a dedicated principal. The principal discussion has never really revealed why it has to be the principal. And most oftentimes than not, what the community members tell me is we want to have somebody who has operational autonomy within the program. A head of school allows that. It allows them to best support and function in that capacity with a high level of intentionality and focusing just on that program and the needs of its students, while also comprehensively being part of the overall campus. And so head of school designation may be a better solution to that. And so what you see here is a modification to salaries based off a recommendation that we move to head of school. And some of these have to continue to be evaluated. Each position has to be evaluated further to make sure that our numbers are correct and that we're properly addressing those things. But ultimately, this would, as compared to the first proposal, the total cost for this would be about $45,000 versus the initial proposal, which was at $64, almost $65,000. So considerable savings. I think it helps address some of the questions and concerns that the board has. I think it does create equity across all programs. We did include Harrison and Summerlin based off the requests of the board to make sure, again, that comprehensively we're looking at all these programs simultaneously. To Ms. Miller, to your point earlier, I think what we may be able to do differently for a program like Harrison, right, is if we do bring a recommendation in the near future about modifying the salary schedule for some of these positions based off program enrollment, then that would be addressed further at that time. But again, we tried to look at all these kind of school within a school programs to make sure that we created a little bit more equity across the board. I think this is consistent also with what the board has done in the past. It raises other questions for opportunities in the future, but for right now, I wanted to make sure that I gave you, and I felt that I tried to address your questions and or concerns to the greatest extent possible. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Miller. Ms. Cunningham.
Just wanted to say thank you, because I know a lot of us spoke about this at our last work session, and I appreciate you taking the time to reevaluate it, and I really think that putting the head of school really delineates the difference between the program head, if you will, and the principal on the campus by not having two principals. I think that's a great blend. So thank you so much for doing this and bringing it back to us this morning. And I fully support this, and particularly Harrison, knowing how hard they work and the need to have that differentiated as well. So thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am, and I apologize. I should have clarified the Harrison change as well. So what took place in the past was we did do an enrollment modification at Harrison. When the program fell below a specified threshold, the current assistant, the principal vacated their role. If I'm recalling the historical history of Harrison correctly, and board members feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the Harrison principal retired or moved on. The assistant principal was promoted. At the time, the decision was made not to maintain a 12-month AP, but they cashed it in, dropped it back down to an AP 10, and the justification for that was enrollment, that they had fallen below a certain threshold of student enrollment, with an understanding that should they exceed that enrollment threshold in the near future, that they would get the AP 12 back. And so that's why that was included in here, was that my understanding is they've exceeded that enrollment cap threshold again, and so they actually requested a review of their enrollment and their staffing, and I know the board had brought that up before as well. Ms. Wyatt, and then Ms. Fields.
For the Harrisons, and I was under the impression that you were just bringing the either principal or head of school positions this week, and that anyone reporting to them, so guidance counselors, teacher, that the staffing plan would be brought later on. Is there a reason to bring the AP 12 for Harrison right now when they already have a principal?
No, we could actually move the AP 12 to an end of year conversation and make that modification for the subsequent school year. It was brought here as part of this conversation simply because the question was asked, what about Summerlin, what about Harrison? And so to get a comprehensive view of all of these programs in one snapshot. But again, the recommendation for that change could wait until the end of the school year.
Okay, because my understanding, they would be the only school with both an AP 12 and a principal, which obviously they have a higher enrollment, but I think we need to look at, I know you're planning to do staffing plans globally.
Correct.
I'd like to wait until that conversation.
Okay.
Just to make sure that it's equitable across the entire district.
Yes, ma'am. Again, only included because the question was asked, and I didn't want people to feel like somehow we'd left a program off, and you had pointed out Summerlin to me earlier, so I wanted to be respectful of each program. Ms. Fields and then Ms. Cunningham.
I'm trying to find Summerlin. Where is Summerlin on the modified proposal?
Summerlin was on the numbers, excuse me.
Okay,
I
on the
provided the
numbers,
numbers
okay.
for Summerlin's enrollment.
All right, and I had the same comments that Ms. White had about Harrison.
Yes, ma'am.
But I wanted to know if it's possible to add the threshold of the capacity for these schools. That would help.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I wanted to know, are we going to do a modified job description for the head of schools?
We will.
And I wanted to know if we could clarify that the salary includes benefits. Because I think a lot of people are of the
Yes, ma'am.
opinion that these people are making this amount of money, and it's causing a lot of confusion
Heartburn.
and heartburn.
Yes, ma'am. These all include benefits.
So if we could say that,
Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure that the table also reflects that. It'll say current salary with benefits.
Yes, sir.
As well. Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
But for the public, for the record, all of these include benefits, and Mr. Warren And Mr. Pitts confirmed that previously for me.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Ms. Cunningham?
Yes, I respectfully disagree with my colleague. I feel that this needs to be addressed, particularly Harrison, with this group. I don't think we need to wait till May, April, May, for the staffing plan. You've identified this. Y'all have taken the time to go through, and I think this is very fair and equitable, and quite frankly, the school needs this, and I think we need to move forward with this as part of this entire plan. So I would like to see this brought forward whenever you bring the others as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Allen?
Yeah, I'm going to speak in favor of that as well. I think it's, quite telling if we look at the students in the program, and I think you're addressing that, but in a future date as it relates to the salary, for a school that's got the higher enrollment, at the AP level there, so, even seeing that in future conversation as well, but that to me reveals that there's a huge need there to draw attention to this now.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Ms. Wyatt?
I was just, to Ms. Field's point on the making sure that that includes benefits, if you could create a column that shows, because I know we're trying to show that our benefits are very valuable, so if maybe we could have what the salary is, but then also have the salary with benefits on any of these that come forward in the future, I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
that would be helpful in getting that
Absolutely.
message out.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great marketing strategy for us as well. You're absolutely right. Now, for the Harrison thing, please understand too, I'll do a little bit more research to make sure that AP very well may be on a 30-day extended contract currently. So even if the board were to take action on Harrison, it would not necessarily have to take effect till this summer. So they're a 10-month, if they're given an 11-month extended contract, that would get us through June, and then we would just offer the position change at the July 1st change to take effect the subsequent year, so they would become 12-month essentially at that point. So it's not necessarily that you would see, because again, I put in here that the costs assume it's a July 1st start date and not a proration. So these costs are what they would cost us in totality for a whole year. But since they haven't been in those roles, these costs will be adjusted as far as our cost as a school district based off of where we are in the school year, not necessarily retroactively at this time. So, but there's an opportunity to bring Harrison forward with understanding it would not necessarily take effect until July 1st. So it wouldn't necessarily be this year, essentially on the budget line. But does that make sense? I hope that clarified.
And that's what Ms. White was saying, I thought, pretty much.
Yeah, I just would like us to have the conversation when we're looking at the staffing plans for everything, just
Sure.
to make sure that there's not other programs that we're missing.
And I'll
in
also
that.
provide you, when we first started having this conversation several months ago, I identified for some of these programs, so for example, Summerlin Academy does have assistant principals as well. They have essentially, not necessarily an assistant principal, they have a 12-month employee below the principal. Bartow IB also has an assistant principal dedicated to the program. So let me do that comparative analysis for you again as a reminder, because that's where we started to see really some of the disparate numbers, especially when you look at enrollment numbers. How do you get, a head of school and an AP for a program that only has 200 and some odd kids, whereas we have school building principals that have 400 or 500 kids and don't have an assistant principal. So this is really what we're trying to get at. So thank you, and I'll provide you some further analysis at this next meeting in February. Ms. Fortney.
And then in the meantime, we have elementary schools that have a principal and an AP with like 1,100 kids,
That is correct.
which
And one
is
and
concerning.
one counselor.
And maybe a counselor.
And one
Right.
counselor. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields.
And that's what I was saying, there's a lot of heartburn, and a lot of conversation out there now about the inequity. So we had to be very mindful of that.
Absolutely. Especially for positions like counselors, and this is actually a good segue, unless there's any further comments about this, to move into the National School Counselors Week acknowledgement here. I'm going to read the proclamation. The board will take action on it at February 22nd. However, given that School Counselors Week launched effectively last Friday, and it goes throughout this week, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the work that they do. And to Ms. Fortney and Ms. Fields' points, we have some schools, 13, 14, 1,500 kids at the elementary level that have one school counselor, and the amount of work that they're being asked to do is immense, and they do an amazing job. But I had the pleasure of meeting that group last Friday as they were going through some professional development, and get to talk with them and share my support for what they do and my sincere appreciation, our sincere appreciation for all that they do each day to support our kids, and committed to having further discussion with them. But that was something that came up, quite honestly, when we had our community meet and greets when I was first being interviewed, where staff were coming up saying, Mr. Hyde, how do you plan on addressing the disproportionality in staff-to-student ratios in many of our positions? So, so the board has some comfort. Any recommendations that come forward with changes to staffing allocation, I think I'll say this publicly, nothing will happen in one fell swoop in 1 year. It's not impossible. It's just simply not possible. Secondly, everything will be prioritized. And so even though I will bring a recommendation, there will be tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 recommendations, meaning we feel that these are the most relevant. Let's get at these in year 1. And then as flexibility in our budget provides opportunities, let's get to tier 2 and let's drill down to tier 3. So it's a very valid point that others have brought up consistently over time is let's be careful about how we do this. Let's make sure that we're being equitable. Let's make sure we're addressing this. I think this is a good step in that direction, looking at how do we provide consistency and uniformity across our programs, but taking into consideration the staffing, taking into consideration the enrollment, and how does that compare to other programs? How does it compare to other school levels? And then based off our, where do we invest our dollars, which really should be at the classroom level and school level. So great discussion, but if there's no further questions on the topic of this administrative piece, I think I have my takeaways and what your expectations are for the 22nd. I'd like to go ahead and move into the National School Counselors Week proclamation, I see no further questions. Again, the board typically reads the proclamation. We are working as a school system to capture all of these so that you'll get them in a timely manner so we can read them ahead of time so that the board can take action. Unfortunately, in February, as I said, the board meeting falls on the 22nd, which is full 2 weeks after National School Counselors Week, so I'd like to go ahead and read the following. Whereas school counselors are employed in public and in private schools to help students reach their full potential, and whereas school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, interests, and talents as these traits relate to career awareness and development, and whereas school counselors help parents focus on ways to further the educational, personal, and social growth of their children, and whereas school counselors work with teachers and other educators to help students explore their potential and set realistic goals for themselves, and whereas school counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society, and whereas comprehensive development school counseling programs are considered an integral part of the educational process that enables all students to achieve success in school. Therefore, the School Board of Polk County Public Schools does hereby proclaim February 7th through the 11th, 2022 as National School Counseling Week to be affirmed at the meeting on February 22nd. Any questions or comments about school counselors?
We love our school counselors.
As Ms. Fortney said, we love our school counselors.
That's it.
That is absolutely correct.
And I would say amen to that. So can we get a break?
Yes, ma'am. We can take a 10-minute break. It is currently 10:37. I would ask everybody to be back here by 10:50. We'll take 13 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are back, maybe. I think we are close to a quorum. All right, we
Ms.
have a
Fortney?
quorum sitting down.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on in our agenda, the next item is the book review process. As the board is aware, there are several books that have been requested to be reviewed and challenged. So in fairness to our community and in an opportunity to be transparent, I wanted to review the process with the board and also by virtue with our community and stakeholders. So the background is that several months ago, we were provided an initial list of 52 books that a stakeholder group had found concerning or identified as concerning and potentially inappropriate that may or may not have been contained within our school libraries. And at that time, we had not done the audit to determine which books were actually located in our schools and at which schools they were located, and a number of books that were present was still being reviewed as well. So we did find that a number of the books were not in circulation in any of our school buildings, and we were able to provide information to them as to where those books are, again, the quantities of books, and we went a step further and actually provided the history, 2 to 3 year history of the number of times those books had been checked out at each school. So we then, as I shared, we discussed with the group the process that the school district has had. It's a long-standing policy. I had forwarded that to the board some time ago, so that you're aware of where it's contained within the admin policies and admin regulations that allows for any resident and/or parent who resides within Polk County Public Schools to challenge media materials. There are 2 challenges that parents and community residents can issue in a school district as it relates to materials. One is instructional materials. There's a specified timeline, so when the board takes action to adopt curriculum and subsequently curriculum materials, there's a 30-day window in which parents and/or residents can challenge the adoption of said materials. That's one process. The second process, as I just outlined, or as I shared previously, is the process in which a parent or resident can challenge a resource material that's contained within a school library. And so just as we shared, I shared with them that process that they would have to take to address those concerns at the school level. I also outlined for them that, very much as we've outlined in our human growth and development curriculum, parents can opt their children out of specific titles and/or themes by virtue of notifying the school of their concerns with that content. On Friday, January 21st, I was then subsequently made aware of allegations that the group was alleging that 16 of the books were in violation of Florida statutes, specifically Florida Statute 847.012, which relates to harmful materials, and Florida Statute 847.001, which relates specifically to obscenity laws. Based off that information, I wanted to provide the board with some context here. And so this slide shows you of the 16 books, the frequency in which those books were checked out for all of our schools. So, for example, the book titled It's Perfectly Normal by Robbie H. Harris over the last 2 to 3 years has never been checked out by a student. So there are actually 5 books that have never been circulated in any of our schools. The count that you can see here, the rest of the books, the majority have been checked out only less than 5 times. And so the most frequently checked out book, quite honestly, was drama for our students. And so, and I'll update that number in there for you. So again, we wanted to provide some context here to say, yes, just the mere existence of these books, because part of the concern is that the presence of these books somehow unduly influences children by their mere presence in the school. So you have to look at circulation. How frequently are children actually checking these books out? I think that also raises a question, and this is where Mr. Bridges and others will have to lend their area of expertise, which is what's the definition of distribution? And the Supreme Court has actually ruled on this matter previously, that in this regard, distribution would not come into consideration when it's a voluntary process that children take to check a book out from the media center. So it's a complicated process. It's a very complicated and delicate issue with concerns on both sides. I mean, I would share the same concerns as many board members and some of our community members that we want materials in our school libraries to be appropriate. We want to make sure that they don't conflict and create issues for our students and our families and our values, and that's appropriate. But we also have to walk a fine line. And so, the decision was made, as I've been asked, why did we quarantine the books? Why did we temporarily pause distribution of these books? And the easiest answer to give is, quite frankly, if there's a claim that we're in violation of statute, and more importantly, one of these statutes specifically says that each instance that these books would be checked out constitutes a separate felony charge. Now, that felony charge is not going to rise to my level. I'm not the one checking out the books, nor is it going to arguably rise to the level of a board member. It would, however, potentially subject staff, our media specialists and our media paras, who end up subsequently checking out these books, to basically, if there were an allegation or a charge, that they would be potentially charged with a felony for each and every time, again, that they checked this book out to a student. It's not a fair position to put our staff in, nor is it an appropriate position to put them in. And as superintendent, as you know, and as board members, we have an obligation to investigate and address any issue where there's an allegation that we're in violation of statute. So at this time, it made the most sense to put those books on what we basically could say is an adaptive pause until such time as the books can be reviewed. Our board policy 2520, and we've received some questions. How is it that we have a different policy, or how is it the superintendent has made a decision to do this when that hasn't necessarily been board policy in the past? And that may be true in the past. However, our current board policy only speaks to the adoption of instructional materials. It does not speak to board by virtue of its role, or myself by virtue of a superintendent's role and authority. Neither of us adopt materials at the school level for media centers. Media centers typically will purchase those materials either through grants, through donations from their PTO, PTA, other types of donations, fundraising events, and there is an allocation that they receive more often than not from the school district to help them supplement their collections. But those books are not authorized or approved or vetted through the school district as instructional materials are. And so the board policy speaks specifically to instructional materials. And again, there is a significant difference in definition between instructional materials and supplemental resources. Additionally, resources are contained within the media center. And so by virtue of that, the board policy, however, means that I have to have administrative policies and regulations. And so admin policy sits behind board policy, which sits behind statute. That basically is how we as a school district will address these issues moving forward. And why board policy did not explicitly address school level or media center materials, it did address instructional materials. And so we actually have a long-standing process that allows for materials to be challenged. In essence, what takes place is a parent or a resident can go to a school where they have a concern. Employees can challenge. And I think I've provided the board previously with the history of book challenges here in Polk County going back over 30 years. And interestingly enough, it's been a pretty steady process for us. And so what ends up happening is at the school level, a committee is formed. What I did was I took our administrative policies, because at the school level, if that committee meets and decides to uphold or retain a book, then there is a process by which that resident or parent can challenge at the district level. And so we would subsequently put together a district review committee. Be given the number of books that exist across the school district and the burden that that would create for each and every school to have to address almost 13 books depending on the school level, it did make sense to address it that way. So we elevated it to a district level concern, or a district level review, and so we put together a very comprehensive committee. The committee structure typically takes into consideration, or typically includes, a school level administrator, a media specialist, some teachers, and some parents. What we've done is we've gone well beyond that in our committee structure here. So we will have two committees. Previously, I had recommended to the board that we have an elementary committee and a secondary committee based on further discussion with our group in order to do this expeditiously and in order to stack and create these committee structures and again, to allow them to proceed in a timely manner. The recommendation is just to have two sitting committees, and the books were delineated here for you, and we'll go through those in a minute. The committee structure for each committee will include either the chief academic officer or his or her designee, so that would be Mr. McNaughton. And essentially, it would have to be a district curriculum level specialist or higher level position. It will have at least two library or media specialists on each committee, two teachers per committee, two parents per committee, one representative from the Florida Association for Media here in Florida, one per committee, one representative from the NAACP, one representative from Equality Florida, one representative from the Concerned Citizens of Polk, one representative from the CCDF. Student Support Services would also have 2 representatives. That includes school counselors, psychologists, and/or social workers. We would also look to incorporate a child psychologist or child development specialist, likely to come from one of our local colleges and universities. And then students at the secondary level with parental consent, we would allow for, at the high school level, 2 students to participate in the review committee, which is allowed under our district policy presently for school level reviews. Given the nature of the concerns with these books, we would require a waiver. And then we would also have a facilitator for each group. Ms. Fortney.
Are we going to have a First Amendment lawyer on these groups?
We're not.
Thank you.
We have the ability to have representation and/or additional insight. Mr. Bridges will provide some directions as to what the committee is required to address and what they are to focus on, and I get into that here in a moment. However, should there be a subsequent challenge after a book is reviewed, then yes, we would have access to specific legal counsel if needed. Yes, ma'am.
We have a recommendation on tap for a First Amendment attorney who routinely represents school districts successfully.
Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, the committee structure as it relates to parents, teachers, and district level staff is commensurate with what our current policy is in admin regs. What we did was we limited 1 representative for each community-based group. So just for clarification there. Ms. Fields.
So will there be an application that the members will have to complete? And if so, who will determine who gets selected? Because I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people that's going to want to serve.
Yes, ma'am. So yes, there is an application. In fact, the application for staff went out yesterday, and as of this morning, we had almost 100 applicants. So there is a vetting process. Number 1, that 100 staff is inclusive of all of those positions, right? So we would look to see how many have applied. We'd look to see what school level they represent. The application does ask them what specific skills that they believe they bring to the review process and basically what they hope to accomplish in this partnership. And so those will be reviewed at the district level for placement on those committees. So we have captured all of that. The applications for community members will go live tonight. Mr. Geary is waiting after this meeting. The emails will start flowing to go out to our community members, and many of these community groups we've already reached out to, and they're aware that will be coming to them.
And then the applications will come back to you and someone else to determine who gets to serve on the committee?
That is correct. And if the board would like to see those applications in their entirety, I'd be happy to compile those.
I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to know what the process was.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Miller.
Can you talk about the process of, at the site level, the school level for parents notifying schools, what that looks like? And can you also answer, do our schools have the capability of locking down Google and YouTube and TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram?
So let me take one question at a time. So I apologize. I mean no disrespect by the chuckle. So the first question was, what's the process? So there is a form within the administrative regs that has to be submitted by a parent or a community member to the building principal to trigger the review. Again, considering the number of books being challenged and the frequency in which they appear in our schools, it's an unmanageable burden to place at the school level, so we elevated it to our level. And based off the documents that have been submitted to us, we're using that as essentially qualifying as the form being submitted. As far as we do have filtering for a lot of the content that you talked about as it relates to students using our network to gain access to YouTube, the internet, and those types of things. So we do have filtering available there. As far as our ability to lock down that content on personal devices and or outside of school, we do not have the mechanism to do that. And that really falls more to parents establishing parental controls on those students' accounts, their children's accounts on their phones and their personal devices.
As a parent, I definitely understand parental control. The form, I just want to make sure it's available to parents if they have that form. And this is for a lot of things. I know of a parent of a 10-year-old, I decided to wait to even talk about national issues of violence that are often discussed at school. 9/11 was one of the things. Before I wanted her reading or viewing about people jumping out of windows to their death, I wanted to discuss that with her first. So I was very much vocal about what she was allowed to see in second grade, because I thought it was important that I introduce that, because this is about parent responsibility and parent control. If that form is available, is it online? Is it in the portal? Where would they find the form to fill out for content that they want to limit?
So I would have to defer to staff as to where the physical location of that is. Mr. McNaughton, if you'll look into that, I can come back to Ms. Miller's question if you can get me an answer during workshop today.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Allen, then Mr. Wilson.
Great, thanks for opening up the procedure, right? So can you assure us that this isn't like the end-all conversation in a sense? Because let's just say the outcome of the committee, says this, but do we still, meaning parents, do parents still have the option to utilize their right as it relates to procedure at school-based level?
Yeah, no, regardless of the decision made by the committee, parents still have the opportunity to say, I would like to filter the content that my children have access to. Just as, again, as I pointed out, that we do for human growth and development. But we have to make sure that parents know exactly which content is available to their children in the library. So giving them access to that database and or themes so that they could choose not to have their child gain access to certain content. That's a parental choice, and it's something we already afford them at this time.
Great, and that brings up that question about, our Destiny system. I was just probing the software a little bit. It does seem like a good opportunity to maybe enhance the usability from a user standpoint, from a, parent chance to look at our catalog. And the catalog's there per school, per site, right? But I'm curious what that looks like as far as steps for a parent to select on a material and say that particular book or text I don't think is appropriate for my child at this age. For example, I've had parents, address like, hey, my first grader's at like way above reading level, but the I Survived series, specifically related to the Holocaust, I don't know if they're quite ready for that conversation, so they'd want to pull that book from their selection. But they went through the process, and it was very clunky and hard to navigate. So maybe that's something we can bring in the conversation as we start to unpack this a bit to make that access way more easy for our parents. The second thing is...
But I feel I need to interject here. That is not our system.
Correct.
Destiny is a third-party provider, and so we can have a conversation with them, but unless we're going to pay for that modification, I just want to be clear that there is the likelihood of them just simply doing that just for our district, having worked with software companies in the past, is highly unlikely, but we can bring that to their attention.
Yep, and I think that's going to help media specialists because, as this conversation unfolds, I think, drawing attention to it more, we're going to see more engagement, I hope. And I think, parent engagement is a good thing. I'm curious how this will play out in conversation with our local library systems as well. So because every student, right, has access with their ID card to access any material they want, in a sense.
And it will not, just for a matter of record, it will not impact their access to content in a public library. Public library operates under a very different set of rules and policies as it relates to First Amendment rights, and they may not restrict content. And so, quite frankly, they are in a better position when it comes to these types of topics to say, no, we're not going to erode that right for a child or for a family. If you object, don't check out the material. But that's the position they can take as a public library. We're not. We're a public school setting. And so there is some ambiguity there and more flexibility on our side as to how we want to address that. But just for the sake of clarification, public libraries are under, regardless of the outcome here, are under no obligation to filter that content. And that's what parents need to be aware of. And again, I think we need to go back to this slide, though. If these are the most concerning books and they're not being checked out, is there justification in the argument that somehow these books are exposing students to content that's basically flies in the face of family values and other things and that are eroding our social system?
Right.
I think, quite honestly, the better argument is what's being done to protect children in an online environment at home in their own time on their own personal devices, because there's a greater likelihood they're accessing content that way than they are clearly through these print materials.
Very interesting. There have been a number of news stories in which it has been reported recently that these materials that were present but not circulated have suddenly had a spike in circulation as a result of the attention being paid to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, historically, we're always, you know, considering the copycat syndrome and so forth, right? You know, even like in film, you know, I think the film program, there was a scene that was edited out because students were copying, you know, they were playing chicken in the middle of the road, right? So, again, I don't think the conversation is anti-intellectual, and I think it's a valued process that we should work through. Because if we hold to the position that it's anti-intellectual, but yet then, you know, culturally speaking, within the last 2 weeks, we're seeing, you know, a flip narrative that's addressing, you know, deplatforming content on Spotify in a sense. Well, really, in essence, we're deplatforming, but we're asking to ban content. I think we're seeing this as well as colleges and universities. We're uninviting guests to come speak. Well, words are words, so we're choosing to try to ban those particular voices. So all that to say is, it's not anti-intellectual. I think it's, you know, like you said, it's a long-standing procedure that's been in our district for a long time. So I think that it would be of value for the procedure to be moved to an open board policy, and I'm not sure if that's even a consideration as well in the process.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. My comments won't be brief, so I'll defer to my colleagues if they have some things they'd like to share first.
Ms. Cunningham?
Yes, my question is, we also have charter high schools in Polk County. Do we know, number one, if they contain these books? And number two, as our committee explores these, will it be able to be the information passed along to them if in fact they have the books in their libraries as well?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, they do have some of these books in their libraries. Several of our local public charter schools do. As to whether or not our decision will influence their schools, they will have to arrive at that decision themselves. All of their books are not contained within our Destiny system, but we can search based off, there is a process in which, and quite honestly, Ann would be best to answer that question, where we get an inventory every so often, or they have had access to our system, so we can basically gain some insight. And so yes, some of those books do exist on their campuses. We have asked for clarification from them as to what extent of not just the 16, but the original 52 exist, and I can share that with the board. But as far as what action they may subsequently take, depending on what happens with our committee, is ultimately up to them.
Right, and I do understand that. I'm just saying, when our committees complete the evaluation of these books, the two committees, I would just like to make sure that that information is in fact passed
Yes, ma'am.
along to the charter schools that contain the books so that they can make an informed decision
Yes,
as
ma'am.
well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fortney.
You may be going to cover this, Mr. Hyde, but will the committees be provided a rubric and to score these books?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And, you know, I'm all for parent choice of what their kids do and don't read. My thing is, you know, we have all students, all kids, and it's kind of unfortunate that these titles are going to be not accessible, even though they have not been heavily checked out, especially given the increase in popularity recently, like Dr. Allen was saying, and Mr. Bridges. So I just wanted people to be mindful, you know, when you ask for things like this, you know, it affects all kids, not just your kid. And you do have the power over your child, but I just want everybody to be mindful of that. Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
I just had a question, and you might have already given this to us. Is there a brief overview of each book? I mean, like a 1 or 2 sentence? Have you given us that?
No, I have not. What I did provide you was the rubric that was completed by the group that outlined and highlighted the passages that they felt were in contradiction with the statutes or they felt were concerning.
Okay, I wasn't speaking of that. I was just wanting to know, like the one book that had 70 checkouts, what that basically covered, but it doesn't have to be answered right now.
Yes, ma'am. I can see if we can provide that for you.
Thank you.
Ms. Miller?
The ones that like a movie was made about, which I think is the one she's referencing, that probably had there were more interest in it. There was more subject matter. I know revolving around that, it's teen suicide, but that was, but that has had public interest. Some of these I've never heard of, and I'm sure most people hadn't, and that's why you have 0. But I think the ones in drama, because it's very popular now with children, is somebody give me the name of the books that are not comics, graphic novels. Graphic novels are very popular, and drama is a graphic novel, so it's very picturesque, comic-like, and so I think that's what made it so popular.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Wilson, would you like to wait till the end? Because I still have a few slides. Okay. So I covered the review, the committee structure, the review steps. To Ms. Fields, or Ms. Fortney, to your question, the committee members will have to read the book in its entirety. They can't just simply glaze through it. They can't just highlight it. We actually have to create a timeline in which they review and read the entire book. Now, thankfully, some of these books are picture books and others are very quick reads. Some of them are very lengthy reads, as our team is finding out. So we've ordered enough books for the committee structure to ensure that everybody has a copy of the book. The chief academic officer or the curriculum specialist that he assigns will notify me of the meeting dates and times. We'll provide that to the board. We will also advertise that with the understand. And there will be people who are allowed to sit in the audience with the clear understanding. There is to be no commentary from the audience. The meetings will take place here. There'll be an open discussion. We will not tolerate jeering. We will not tolerate comments from the audience. If that occurs, quite frankly, we will remove them from the meeting. It's not appropriate. Let the committee function in the format in which it was created. But we'll provide all those expectations. I've had conversations with multiple stakeholder groups who are all in agreement that they will help abide by that and help spread that information because, again, we want this to be an uninterrupted process and a fair process. And then the facilitator will convene a meeting of the School Library Media Committee, and essentially Mr. Bridges will provide an introduction as to focus and intent. The minutes of the meeting will be taken. Meetings will be advertised as I shared. Members of the public may attend but are not permitted to comment from the audience. We will also record the meetings as we do school board meetings, and we'll post those on our website for stakeholders to see. The committee will follow the approved agenda for examination requests and the balloting process. The vote by committee must be by signed ballots, so it's not just a yay or nay. Everybody has to sign and attest to their vote and final recommendation as to the book. The chief academic officer or curriculum specialist will then notify the superintendent of the decision by telephone and in writing, and then send the packet to the superintendent, including the memorandum of decision, checklists for all the materials evaluations that were completed, and the final copy of the signed ballots. The superintendent will then notify the board and the complainant of the committee's decision. So, and rather than waiting till all the books are addressed, as these books are addressed in real time, there'll be a constant flow of information to the board as to the committee's recommendation. It is important to note that the committee has really several options available to them. The committee may vote to eliminate a book from circulation based off concerns. They may opt to maintain a book in circulation. They may also make a recommendation to modify the grade level band in which the book is appropriately placed. So for example, a book right now that has an age band or grade level band that's 6 through 12, the committee may make a recommendation to move that book in its entirety to the high school level. And so those are the 3 options available to them. So again, what does the committee have to look at? They look at age and grade level appropriateness. They have to answer several questions, and this really gets to Ms. Fortney's question about the rubric. These questions are reflected in the rubric that they complete as individuals.
Is the checklist the same as the rubric or no?
I'm not following.
The checklist that was mentioned on the very first.
So they actually go, after they read the book, they will complete the form that addresses these questions, and that serves as the rubric or the checklist. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that was my
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Thank you.
And that rubric is the same one from our past procedure, right?
That is correct. Everything from here was taken directly from existing policy. Will reading or listening to this work result in a more compassionate understanding of human beings? Does this work offer an opportunity to understand and appreciate better the aspirations, achievements, and problems of different cultures and/or minority groups without stressing differences of class, race, color, sex, education, religion, or philosophy in any adverse way? Are questionable elements of this work an integral part of a worthwhile theme, message, or attempt to develop a character? In what way or ways does this work support and promote the educational goals and objective of Polk County Public Schools? In what way or ways are concepts presented in a manner appropriate to the ability and maturity of the suggested audience? How does the material make a significant contribution to the history of ideas? Is the information in this book current and or accurate in as far as we are aware or you are aware? Are illustrations appropriate in good taste as it relates to the student's developmental age? Could the work be considered offensive due to profanity, brutality, sexual behavior, violence, cruelty, abhorrent behavior, political positions, portrayal of societal groups, or portrayal of religious groups? And what is the work's literary intent? And then essentially, once they conclude that, they come back, they reconvene, they have a discussion, and then they vote. As I said, it is a vote by signature ballot, and so then the committee will make a final recommendation to my office. Here's the proposed timeline for committee number one. Week one, they'll have an introductory meeting. They'll be trained, and they'll be assigned the first week reading of the first book to read, which will be Two Boys Kissing. In the second week, they'll review the book, Two Boys Kissing, and they'll also be assigned The Kite Runner to start reading. And then you see the progression here of how to address this. So we anticipate it taking roughly 13 to 14 weeks to complete this process. Committee number two, you see the books here listed. They'll begin with drama. They'll then go to Beloved, The Vincent Boys, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. They'll have a bye week to accommodate spring break. They'll then have Real Live Boyfriends, Tricks, and Almost Perfect, and I Am Jazz. So that's the proposed timeline. Again, everything is submitted back to the school district through my office and then be brought before the board for the board to basically take into consideration what the recommendations are as to the book's status in our collections. And that's, again, both the committee structure, the process, the timeline, and the questions that committee members will be asked to complete. To Ms. Field's question, the sign-up link went out yesterday. As I shared, we had almost 100 participants or candidates sign up. Following today's meeting, this link will also be sent out to all of our parents, asking them if they choose to volunteer. We've already been contacted by several parents asking, so they'll be provided with the link as well, so that they can submit an application with their intent to participate, and we'll go from there. So, Mr. Wilson, I believe that concludes the majority of my summary, so I know you said you had a lengthy comment, so.
I do. Thank you, Superintendent Hyde.
Yes, sir.
I was contacted by some concerned parents. They asked me to look at some passages within some textbooks and in our libraries, and I agreed to do that. When we met, they didn't talk to me about titles. They didn't talk to me about themes. They didn't talk to me about styles or anything else related to the book itself. They talked about very specific passages within certain textbooks. And they had two concerns. They were concerned about passages that graphically portrayed forcible rape and passages that graphically portrayed bestiality. Those were their concerns, just those two. They asked me to read them. I read a handful, and I had to stop. I was saddened. It was disheartening. It was horrific, dehumanizing, defiling humans, and it was vile. The passages I read had that effect on me. You know, science tells us the human brain is not fully developed until sometime in the mid-20s, and largely the portion of the brain that's not developed is the ability to discern and differentiate, the ability to tell what is right and wrong and what is good and bad. I think in our society today, we see a proliferation of violence among young people, and I think that's a product of normalizing violence in our society. I'm not sure why we would want to normalize forcible rape and bestiality, and I think by having those textbooks in our libraries, and we're not a public library. We have, I think, a big responsibility that we do that. By having those books in our libraries, we normalize that, I think, and I think that I have concerns about that. I've talked to as many people as I could about this. I've talked to my friends, my relatives, I've talked to teachers and parents and students and folks I ran into in the grocery store. And I asked them about this issue, and across the board, and without exception, everyone said that some things should not be made available to our students, that there are some things that should be banned. Now, folks disagreed on what should be banned and what shouldn't, but everybody agreed that there were some things that shouldn't be made available to students in the K-12 environment. Most folks agreed that pornography should be banned, although not everyone. There were some folks who told me that the Bible should be banned. But interestingly, those same folks said that classical literature should not be banned. So I looked up the definition of classical literature in the dictionary, and the Bible qualifies as classical literature, is the epitome of classical literature. So that seemed rather illogical to me. So I asked them, why do you think the Bible should be banned? Their answers were all the same, because of the concern that young people might be unduly influenced by it. So they believe that young people could be unduly influenced by the Bible, but not by graphical portrayals of forcible rape and bestiality. They think somehow they have the ability to differentiate. That seems to me to be just stunningly illogical. But that's where we are as a society. I want to commend Mr. Hyde for his approach to this matter, because the passages I read, I looked at the statute, and the passages I read, I think could very easily exceed the threshold for pornography. And I think we needed to make sure that we're doing the right thing in protecting our employees. So I just want to thank him for that. This is not banning books is not a decision that I will make or that the superintendent will make. It's a decision that will be made by community members, and that's the way it should be. Mm-hmm. I think that, for my concern, I would hope we could refocus this discussion away from banning books, because the reality is everybody agrees that some books, some material should be banned. What we should be talking about is the materials that we think are appropriate for our students, and what are the standards that we want in our community. And as a community, we should have that conversation. And I'm going to offer a thought for a standard that we might use. I may be out of touch, I might be wrong about this, but I suspect if we took the passages that I read and put them on our website, they would come down very quickly. I think our community would be outraged. And I think that's something we could use as a standard. If we can't take a passage out of a book and put it on our website, maybe we shouldn't have it in our library, right? So I don't think that those passages I read would be on our website very long. I think our community would be up in arms very quickly. So again, I'm offering this. If we could reframe this discussion and move away from the discussion of banning books, because everybody agrees some things should be banned, how do we set the standards in our community? That's the conversation we ought to be having, and we ought to have that conversation as a community. Our community ought to be involved, as it will be, and I think that's the right thing to do. So thank you for allowing me an opportunity to share that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Miller?
I have a question on how books get into our library from the state. Can you explain that? Like state approval, DOE, or we are choosing them amongst ourselves? Are they district-wide? Are they chosen by separate schools to be removed? I mean, to be there and then chosen by separate schools to be removed?
In fairness, I'm going to limit you to one hard question per
No.
workshop session.
Lots of hard questions. That's what I get
Actually, it's a very good question, and I think to a certain extent it gets to exactly what Mr. Wilson was pointing to at the end of his comments, which is what's our standard, and what's the minimum standard, and what's our threshold. So presently, we do not have a particular process for how materials are adopted. And this is an area where publishers, to a great extent, have sometimes taken advantage of school districts. So here's what typically happens. A school says, we got a grant, we have $5,000, and we want to buy materials for our library. We're an elementary school. So we contact one of the providers, and they source books for us. And sometimes we get high-frequency books, and meaning those that are in high demand and high interest, and other times they're supplementing the books that they're giving us with low-demand books. And it really falls upon us to then vet every single title that comes before us, and that has not consistently happened in the past. I can tell you that hasn't happened, and that's not a Polk issue. That's an everybody issue, which is why you see the legislature and countless others trying to ramp up and encourage and require a process where vetting takes place at the school level for instructional materials. I've had this conversation with Board Chair Wyatt, and we as a school district are adopting that policy in anticipation ahead of time, because even if this doesn't pass in legislature, I think we need to Mr. Wilson's point, which is what is going to be our standard threshold for what's acceptable and what's not, and how are we defining pornographic or obscene, and that's a tough place to live. And Mr. Bridges reminds me frequently that we've been arguing about how to define obscenity for well over 20 years in public education, but it's something we have to address. So, Ms. Miller, to your question, is there a vetting process? No. Does the state of Florida provide us with approved books? They do to a certain extent. They do not for libraries. They do provide recommended books that they feel support the curriculum, the standards, and some of our specific projects. AP, for example, Advanced Placement, has books that are recommended. And some of those books are going to be on the challenge, the original 52 book list. Some of those are there, and I think people have come to understand that there are books that, while I may necessarily find them offensive, they may not rise, again, back to Mr. Wilson, it may not cross that threshold where they're unacceptable. And so that's the difficult conversation that needs to happen right now. But we have not previously had a methodical process for the review of adopted materials at the school level. Nor is there an approval process at our level. I will say, much to Mr. McNaughton's credit, that since he's taken the position, he's worked very closely with the rest of his team, and we have caught some titles and prevented titles from getting into our schools over the last 6 months, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to do that. I think it's important for us and incumbent on us. We've reached out to help address this issue, knowing that there's a potential language moving through the legislature. I had a conversation with one of our local legislators and offered our assistance. If the state isn't going to take a definitive role in giving us a list of books that they will defend, that they will stand behind, then let's create rules and policies that give us really concrete operating parameters and stop putting us in a position where it's very ambiguous and leaves it up to us. You know, and I'm the first to defend local control, but I'm also a rule follower. So if you give me the rules and they're ambiguous, is it really a rule? And it creates more issues than it does benefit us. And so we've offered to be of assistance in this discussion to say, you know, what is going to be the process moving forward for how books are donated or adopted, purchased, and for our school libraries. I think that's important because I think that that's coming. And if you think about how many books we currently have, is the expectation we now go through and individually review every one of those books? What's that process and timeline look like? Or is it just moving forward with certain expectations? So there's a lot to unpack there, Ms. Miller, and hopefully I was able to address at least part of your question, but we are working on a thorough process. I did, in light of, again, some bills that are moving through the Senate and the House, ask staff to start to develop a process so we can best support our schools with that review. And I have no doubt that some books will be contested, saying, well, we really want this, and others don't. And then what we'll do is we'll default back to our review structure and allow that committee to make a decision, an informed decision. And we'll follow some of the current draft language from the state that says that parents and community members need to be part of that discussion. I think we're very open to that. I'm very receptive to empowering our parents. And, you know, Dr. Allen, to your point earlier, you know, as Destiny, there are very few systems in education that aren't clunky, to use your term. You're absolutely right. So how do we provide, much like we did with human growth and development, can we provide an easy-to-find list that categorizes books by themes, by topics, not just by titles alone? Reading a book title isn't going to tell you anything about the theme, arguably. And I think it's important for us to make sure that whatever books are in our library, parents are aware that they're there, what the recommended grade level appropriateness is, and what those themes entail. And so if parents want to click, okay, I want to block my child from having access to these themes, there you go. We can make it a one-click approach, and and that becomes the notification that goes into Destiny to the media specialist. It's a little bit more labor intensive on our part, unless Destiny can work with us to create a better system. And who knows, maybe there's a better system out there other than Destiny, which, well, of course, my having said that now panics everybody in the audience that works in that regard, because they're thinking we're going to adopt something new. That's not what I'm saying, but we'll have to wait to see what we can do to address that. But we are working on that. Ms. Miller, did I satisfy your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm looking forward, when whoever forwards that form that's available and how to access the form for parents who are concerned. And then, because I'm interested in how we're going to put things into themes, that may be difficult as well, so.
Yeah, themes and genre are very common, so almost every book that we purchase has, little click links under them that identify the themes that are commonly associated with that book. So it's actually something we already have. And
I'm very interested, Mr. Wilson touched on it, what students are subjected to, but you can look by this list. Maybe we need to look at working with safe schools. We need to talk about what's available to them in their hands. Some of the things that I cannot imagine what children are seeing at a very, very young age. And yes, while this is very important and we have parent choice, I think we need to, maybe parents don't understand what the kids are accessing with the devices they're holding. It's things you never could have imagined or dreamed of, and that's where you get into, the sheriff explaining how children are taken advantage of, all the way to trafficking. Parents, we've got to help maybe educate them on what their responsibilities are for things that are very much accessed, as well as how they can, avoid topics or genres of books. These books became very popular now. Like, I'm sure Amazon is selling out because we've made them an issue, which I understand the reasoning behind it. But I think we after looking at that, we need to look at, tech is where we are losing these kids. And so maybe we need to have some kind of parent portal or parent resource online that gives them, things to look for and what to do and how to block things on their children's devices. Because I can tell you the themes that Mr. Wilson very well described can be found within 2 clicks for any child. And I've seen kids, little kids, 3 and 4 years old, with phones with no kind of parental guidance. So maybe we should offer that as well under some kind of parent portal. Make sure you're looking at these things because this is, be concerning to your child.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney?
That's a great point, Ms. Miller. Kind of brings me to, this is just my thoughts, and I've talked to a couple other people here close. We rate everything else, like even video games get a rating. Adult, whatever. Maybe, when Mr. Wilson is talking about our standards, and that's an easy way for parents to understand. It's PG. It's, whatever. I'm just going to throw that out there. And the other thing is, I'm so glad you set up the rubric to where the readers have to read the entire book and not just individual passages that would be taken possibly out of the context of the meaning of the book, instead of just picking and choosing what you would consider to be inappropriate. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the credit, but that was not me. That was our existing policy, thankfully, which required that. So I think, and they took that step to prevent exactly what you were commenting on.
Thank you.
Dr. Allen?
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Hyde. I mean, the openness of the conversation is what we're looking for, and I think that you've set it up in a very public manner, and, I'm definitely valuing the time, the thought, the protection as well of our staff, our students as well. And I think the conversation, what we're saying, even when I hear Ms. Miller speak about, the technology, I think historically we are always addressing technology and messaging. And it's never just you're this way or this way, right? In regards to accepting messages, accepting technology. We've got individuals in society, we've got, say, the Amish. What they did was they rejected technology, which in essence rejected messages. You've got the Luddites historically as well, that rejected technology, rejected media messaging. So, as parents, we're constantly on the scale of accepting, rejecting. We want to separate. Maybe we want to reform messages as well. So the thought that, it's just this way or that way is not the case. And so I think it's a good way to distill ideas, and the thought that we can engage more parents in this, I value it. So thank you.
Yeah, so the last thing, Ms. Cunningham, I'll let you go next. So the question about internet usage and things of that nature. So most school districts adopt, so as we go to one-to-one, there'll be a discussion about a different software, and I'll use one name that I'm familiar with because I've used it. It's called Securely. So every month, a report actually goes home to parents via email, and it allows them to see every web search their child has done through our filter system. And it is important to note that parents should really look at that. Students are very creative. If they want to see something, it's amazing how many different ways they will phrase it, spell it, to try and get around and circumvent the filter to get at content. And it is today's world in technology, it is our own version of the Cold War, because every single day, content, outside people, we can use the phrase bad players, always want to find an opportunity to get at people around filters. And so it is this war of attrition, and where you're constantly having to evolve, and your filtering system is being responsive. And that's one of the things I like about our filtering system here, is it is responsive. So the parent company provides us regular updates saying, okay, we're seeing increased traffic in regards to this, and we're finding that pornography and other type of content may be linked to this. So they block it, and they white page it, and then we block it internally. And it's just this natural progression. But getting parents to understand what their children are searching, because even when you're outside our system, even if we go one-to-one, when we go one-to-one next school year, everything funnels back through our system. So even if a child's on their Wi-Fi at home and they think that they're accessing the internet outside of us, they are not. They're constantly being funneled back through us. And so that Securely report will reflect every term that their child's looked at. And parents need to pay attention to that, because there's a powerful opportunity there to have a conversation with their child about appropriateness in their searches. And that's really what we're trying to do. And there's no misnomer that somehow us giving a child a device is creating that. Children are currently looking for that content on their own personal devices. And it's an important tool and a process for us to bring parents along as we go one-to-one, as we look at this, that how do we help inform and give parents the tools and the knowledge and the resources that they can actually feel competent in being involved in researching this and supporting their children and filtering content appropriately, or when they find something, how can I have a conversation with my child if I'm finding this in the search engine? And that's important to note. And there's no deleting that history. It's not like going into your search history on a personal device and delete it. It doesn't happen in that system. So there's no way to mask it, thankfully. And it's whether we go with that company or another company, that will be part of our process. And I think that provides parents with a high level of comfort that we're constantly monitoring those things. And it also works to the advantage that if a child were to search for themes that are violent or self-harming, it automatically triggers a response, and it triggers the crisis team to meet with that child and the parent immediately. And that happens in real time. It doesn't happen 24 hours delayed, which is really important. So it's a great process, and there's lots of companies out there that offer similar products, but that will be something we'll be discussing in the near future. Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to you and staff for addressing this and bringing it up to the board and coming up with solutions. It's difficult when community members sometimes come up with different things, and we're all very busy, but I think this is one of those topics that is most concerning. I know it's only a few books and a few passages, but it's very important that the content that we have in our school libraries meets with what we need to be educating our students with. So I just want to thank you that when this was brought to you, that you are being proactive and creating the committees and including community members to continue to look at this. And I'm sure it'll be an ongoing process as we move forward, because I'm sure these are not the only ones in our school libraries. And I want to thank Mr. Wilson for your poignant comments today. Thank you for taking the time to actually read the books and the passages. I was not able to do so because of the content as you spoke. It's pretty gross to me, and it took a lot for you to go home and to do that on your time. And I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your comments. And I wholeheartedly agree that this is something that we need to continue to look at. And as you said, we need to come up with the standard that by which we're going to have for our books in our libraries. So I just want to say, Mr. Wilson, thank you so much for doing what you did and going the extra mile. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
You know, I think if you read the passages that I read, there's no way to rationalize it. You can't say, well, if this is part of a bigger picture, it's okay. It was just pretty awful stuff. You know, I think we can't control what happens outside our district. We can't control what students do with their own devices, but, you know, not taking some sort of action here, I think we're implicitly condoning things that normalize activities in our society that I personally don't think we want to normalize. I think about Alfred Hitchcock and the stories he wrote. And he didn't have to portray things graphically. He was very creative in the way he impacted our imagination. And I'm wondering why it's so important for authors today who are critically acclaimed authors to sensationalize things the way they do in the graphic portrayals that we sometimes see. And you know, what happened to creativity? What happened to the ability to share those things with us without being so graphic? And why do we? Because I think it goes back to this. To me, it's very simple. It's just normalizing something we don't want to normalize. It's a pretty awful thing in our society, whether it's rape or bestiality or violence. I think that we have a responsibility to try to address that and set some appropriate standards. So it's my personal opinion, you just can't rationalize that. So those are my comments. And thank you, Ms. Cunningham, for your comments.
Mr. Superintendent.
Mr. Bridges?
If I might, ladies and gentlemen, this is a pendulum that is swinging widely and wildly, not only in Polk County, not only in Florida, but all across the country. So if you follow this on national news, you'll see the same issues that are coming up everywhere you look. The seminal case that everybody is talking about from the Supreme Court is Island Trees versus Pico, which is a 1982 case. And in that case, the terminology that was used to describe the materials was anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy. And the Supreme Court of the United States finally considered this case. And it was the most divided and split and fractionalized court that I think I have ever seen. And I want to read this to you, and I dare you to follow this. Let's see here. Justice Brennan announced the judgment of the court and delivered an opinion in which Justices Marshall and Stevens joined, and all but Part 2A1 of which Justice Blackmun joined. Justice Blackmun filed an opinion concurring in part and concurring in the judgment. Justice White filed an opinion concurring in the judgment. Chief Justice Berger filed a dissenting opinion in which Powell, Rehnquist, and O'Connor joined. Justice Powell filed a dissenting opinion. Justice Rehnquist filed a dissenting opinion in which Justice Berger and Justice Powell joined. And Justice O'Connor filed a dissenting opinion. The case came down, it ended up being technically a 5-4 decision, but it was really 4-4-1. Nobody agreed with anybody. It is splintered. The result is, you can articulate the result. The result was the court came down and basically said that you can't, that local school districts are constrained not to violate the Bill of Rights, that you have broad powers, but you can't violate the Bill of Rights. And that means that you can't make decisions about what's in your library based on whether you like it or don't like it. That it has to be narrowly focused. You should be aware that there are at least 2 bills active right now House Bill 1467 and Senate Bill 1300. They're companion bills, and they address this to some degree. And they talk about library materials. This is concerning. Here's the proposed language. Each book made available to students through a local school district library and media center or required as part of a book list used in a classroom must be selected by a school district employee who holds a valid educational media specialist certificate, regardless of whether the book is purchased, donated, or otherwise made available to students. I don't know how many thousands of volumes there are in school media centers these days. I assume that it's still thousands. But that means we're going to have to see what that means. Does that mean that books that are already there have to go back and be individually reviewed by, and not by teachers, not by administrators, but by media specialists? Imagine the load to try to accomplish that, so that you have every single book, and the language in both of these bills talks about books. It doesn't talk about electronic materials, which is another issue for another day. But every single book in that media center is going to have to be vetted and selected, is the word they use, by an employee who has a media specialist certificate. So that is an enormous load, I suspect. But watch it, and watch it carefully. You may be interested to note that both of those bills also include provisions about school board compensation, and so they're likely to get hearings because of the textbook and media center language. But the House bill initially called for the elimination of compensation. The Senate bill tied it to the compensation of state legislators. My understanding is that on Friday, the sponsor of the House bill removed that provision and replaced it with term limit language. So that's one way of getting compensation in term limits before the legislatures. I think they'll, at a minimum, some of that will get a hearing. But the point of all of this is that this is an exceedingly complex issue. When the Supreme Court of the United States is fractionally divided, so that it is hard to follow, what that does is it gives parties on both sides encouragement to seek to go and make some new law, and all they need is a defendant. So it behooves us to be very careful, and to be very thoughtful, to be thorough in our processes, and I think that Mr. Hyde and his staff are doing that.
Thank you, sir. All right, last topic before the board here today is a topic on workforce diversity. This is going to fit very well under our strategic plan goal area of developing great teachers and leaders. I've had several concerns be brought to my attention of late, especially as we head into the end of the school year and we'll have subsequent administrative appointments and whatnot. The following concerns have been brought to my attention since I've arrived here. There appears to be disproportionality as it relates to minority employment in school-level administrative and senior administrative roles. Minority candidates are underrepresented in the pool of pipeline programs, and our school staff, including leadership, is not reflective of the demographics of that school and or its community. So that caused me to do a little bit of research. So we pulled through Human Resources, and thank you to their team, and they're actually pulling some subsequent data for us to do some further analysis. There are 344 school-based administrators, of which 227 are female. Of those, almost 70% are white, 23% are black, and 8% are Hispanic. 117 of our school-level administrators are male, of which 62% are white, 28% are black, and 10% are Hispanic. Demographics, we delineate further by position type. So for our female administrators, 143 of them are assistant principals, again, predominantly white, 68%, 10% Hispanic, and 22% black. 80 of them are principals, 70% are white, 5% are Hispanic, 25% are black. And the demographic report that I received from HR also included 4 assistant directors, and 2 of those are white, 1 is Hispanic, 1 is black. For our male administrators, of which less than 50% of the total population as compared to female administrators. 74 of our assistant principals are male, 59% are white, 12% are Hispanic, 28% are black. 37 principals we have in the male ranks, 65% are white, 5% are Hispanic, 30% are black. And of the assistant directors, we have 3 white assistant directors, or 75% of them are white, 1 is Hispanic, and there are 0 African-American black assistant directors. Now that, again, is focused solely on school level. We're pulling the district level positions as well to look at that. So we also started to kind of drill down. So if it's true that we aren't seeing, and questions have come up recently as we've done appointments, did we have any minority candidates? The school is predominantly Hispanic. Why wasn't there a Hispanic candidate that applied? Or was there a Hispanic candidate that applied? And there were not. In many instances, we're not seeing candidates come forward and applying for the job, which raises 2 questions. Number 1, are our candidates not feeling confident in applying? Number 2, are we actually recruiting them to apply for certain job openings within the county? And number 3, do we have enough in the bench, the pool of candidates, that they feel competent and are willing to apply for those jobs? So we started to drill down and we look at our pool. So we have a pipeline program here in Polk County Public Schools, as all school districts do, a Grow Your Own program for administrative ranks for both assistant principals and principals. So interestingly enough, when we looked at the demographics of our pool by ethnicity, overwhelmingly, again, I think you see the disproportionality aligns to with exactly what we're seeing in our administrative ranks. The overwhelming majority of candidates in the AP pool right now, 62 of them are white, 3 are Hispanic, and 9 of them are African American black. When you look at the principal pool based off ethnicity, 66 of them are white, 8 are Hispanic, 26 are black. Then we started to drill down, so outside of our cohort and outside of our pipeline, what are we seeing through University of South Florida, who we partner very closely with for educational leadership programs? Again, you continue to see a pattern there, overwhelmingly disproportionately white candidates. 3 or 5 were Hispanic, 8 were black, and 1 was Asian Pacific Islander. So, you know, for us in particular, I started to have conversations with our regionals and asked, after following a principal appointment, saying, you know, what strong assistant principals do we have who are Hispanic? We were looking at one school in particular that overwhelming is a Hispanic population and community. So what strong assistant principals? Because the assistant principal is not Hispanic. They're white. They're not black. They're not African American black or Hispanic. They're a white assistant principal. And so the question comes, well, do we not have strong candidates that we could reassign or relocate so that we can create greater diversity amongst our administrative ranks? And the answer that I got was no. So I started meeting with the regionals and having conversations with them saying, well, how many minority candidates do you feel that you've interviewed this last summer? And one regional in particular told me that she'd interviewed 6 or 8 minority candidates and not one was selected for promotion. And so it raises some very valid questions. And I've had this conversation with Cabinet. I've had this conversation with Cheryl Joe in particular because I want her to take no offense, but tough questions have to be asked. We're not seeing minority candidates applying to the pool, gaining access to the pool, and being successful. Of those who are, why aren't we seeing a higher placement rate amongst them? What is it that's happening after the pool when they complete that program that ultimately isn't leading to them making the transition to the next level? This is not a commentary that says that our pipeline program is deficient. It may be a commentary, and up for further discussion and evaluation as we move forward, as to what are we doing after they complete the program to ensure that they're getting access to projects and assignments and duties and responsibilities that continue to further their growth. And then how are we as a district going to target advertisements to ensure that we are trying to create greater equity across some of our schools? Now, I will preface all of this, by saying our commitment at the end of the day is to put the best, most highly skilled administrator and teacher in every single classroom, regardless. However, there are some other commitments that we need to make sure, based off the data that we're seeing. We need to ensure that our leadership pipeline program provides adequate training and experiences to ensure that candidates have a high placement rate upon completion. We're seeing a high number of candidates who ultimately aren't getting hired into jobs. We also need to work with our building leaders, to be quite frank. I've had conversations with several employees who I would tell you are highly skilled, absolutely hands down can do the job, except they themselves are telling me that they've been overlooked and told, you're my best candidate, except I can't hire you because I have to go internal. Then why are we interviewing? Why aren't we just having a conversation and say, let's just directly appoint somebody? Why are we putting on this farce of an interview when you know you're not going to select an external candidate? And I think, quite honestly, what really lies behind some of this is there's an underlying culture that people are quite honestly not willing to put themselves out there anymore because they question whether or not this job is really open. I was asked that by board members when we talked about community liaisons and we've talked about other positions. Is this a real vacancy or are you going to already put somebody there? Because I'm hearing rumors that so-and-so's already guaranteed that job. And I will tell you that in every instance thus far, those have been false. Every single instance, and I think much to board members' surprise and delight. The reality of it is we have to make sure that we have a vacancy, that it's really a vacancy, and we're open and receptive to those things. But I would like to see us go back, and we're going to have this conversation and do a boot camp for a lot of our bench candidates to say, how do we make sure that they're really prepared to make that next level transition? Because once they complete the pipeline, we're really reliant upon their experiences at the school level to further their professional growth. We've not really approached it with a high level of intentionality to ensure that that happens. And let's just be honest, schools are very busy. Some principals are excellent mentors and others are so caught up in the day-to-day. And we talked about, one school could have 1,300 kids, but they only have a principal and AP, and another school may have a principal and AP with 800 kids or 600 kids. I tell you, their day-to-day is very different as far as workload and things like that. Not skill set, but their workload. So do they have the time to dedicate to grooming somebody else and mentoring them? And so that's an opportunity for us moving forward. We also have to ensure that our staff is reflective of the demographics of our school district and communities we serve. Again, we're always going to be committed to hiring the best and most highly skilled and qualified candidate. I believe we have an obligation to ensure that everybody who comes out of the pipeline meets that definition. And I think we're seeing that that's not the case right now. And we have to explore why. I'm going to be very honest with you. We will be meeting with candidates who have not subsequently been hired into these jobs to say, what happened in your interview? We also have to get very comfortable with giving people real feedback. We are really good. Everybody loves the compliment sandwich. And I'm hoping everybody knows what that is. I open with, Mr. Green, I've always appreciated you as a building leader. But I'm really disappointed in how you handled this. But I'm positive you're going to leave this office today and you're going to do a great job. I will assure you I've never had that conversation with Mr. Green to date, but I had to use him as an example. That's a good example of a compliment sandwich, right? We start with a compliment, we throw something in the middle that's a problem or a concern, and then we immediately backstep and throw another compliment in there. We're really not giving feedback. We're not. We're not comfortable giving critical feedback. And it doesn't have to be critical. And that's what the shift that we're going to have to make, which is how do we give corrective feedback and then start to align opportunities for them to improve. And let me use a teacher as a great example. If we walk into an evaluation with a school-based teacher who's working their behinds off every single day, and we say, you're not going to be highly effective this year, I'm going to rate you as effective. And every single year we look at the evaluation for that person, let's say 5 years goes by, and they never move from effective to highly effective. It's not the teacher's fault every single time. It's not. We're not identifying opportunities to help them and create trainings and exposure and mentoring and coaching. We're not creating that opportunity to move them from good to great. If we're not doing it at the classroom level, and let's acknowledge that we're not doing it at the classroom level, we aren't doing it at the leadership level either. And so what I'm bringing to you is when we talk about our next strategic plan, we talk about developing great teachers and leaders, there has to be a sincere commitment on how do we move from good to great. And we have some phenomenal leaders. Don't get me wrong. This is not a diminishment of the people working hard every day. We've got to move from good to great. Ms. Cunningham.
And I think part of that we talked about during the interview process for the superintendent, because the one thing that we don't have in this district, since I've been here, quite frankly, because, day-to-day operations take up most of our time, is succession planning. And I know how much you and I had that conversation in our little 1-hour meeting that we had during that process, and you assured me that that was something that you build into any, organization that you work with. And I think here, Because what you said about the external candidate saying, well, I understand, it's going to be internal, the internal says it's going to be external. We've done both. But I think in order to be fair to our employees, it's very difficult if you don't have succession planning and grooming, for me to say, wow, where is my next step? What can I aspire to do in the organization? Because if we don't have that, which is what is happening, people are going to leave. And the whole point is to keep and retain, not just teachers and so forth, but folks at the district office, folks in our maintenance divisions. It doesn't matter. People want good pay, good benefits, and they want the opportunity to move to the next step. So I am a big proponent of the succession planning piece. So I kind of feel like what you're saying here today is that we'll be moving into that, to evaluate, tell you where you're at. Here's some things I think we need to do because we can all improve. And then if you do, here may be some opportunities for you. That gives people hope. And I think that's where we need to be. And I appreciate you bringing this up today, and I look forward to seeing some of the succession planning as we move forward for our employees. Thank you.
And this applies, like I said, to district-level positions, and we'll provide you
Yes.
the analysis of that in the near future, but also classroom-level positions, our students walking into classrooms and seeing themselves in the classroom.
Sure.
But it's really important, too, that when we provide feedback after an interview, that we're also providing that feedback back to their immediate supervisor. Because when that person leaves and doesn't get the job, it's going to fall to that immediate supervisor to then provide a support plan to put them on a trajectory to be successful in the future. And that's really where we have to continue to invest. And I think our employees are really, I'm going to be honest with you, I think they want this. I think they're asking for this. And we got to get past this, create a different culture where people feel enthusiastic about the opportunities in front of them, and not that, again, the frequency in which I hear, I have already heard this job is guaranteed to somebody else, is alarming. I got to be honest with you, I think it creates it negatively or adversely impacts our overall culture, because people start to believe that. And let's be honest, they may have seen instances where that was true. And at the end of the day, they don't apply. Why would I do it? It's already guaranteed for somebody else. And so I think we have to be more respectful and reflective of that practice. And you see there the last bullet, ensuring that the information is shared so it becomes a coaching opportunity. And for us to continue to refine for our aspiring leaders, where do they need to grow? Where do they need to go? And I think Ms. Collins uses a phrase, you got to go to grow, because she likes moving people around to give them varied experiences to get them ready for the next level. And it's an interesting process, and some school districts do that quite frequently. So, Ms. Fields.
So Superintendent Hyde, I want to thank you because we've had some very serious, tough discussions about diversity and the importance of embracing and preparing our staff. So I'm happy to know that we're going to sit down with the staff and help them to understand where they need to improve or do something a little bit different. I don't think anybody want a handout. They want an opportunity.
Correct.
Based on their ethnicity, based on their gender. They want an opportunity. And I feel that I have talked to many people, and I think the bottom line is that after they apply so many times, they get discouraged, they get tired, and they say, why even apply?
Yes, ma'am.
And they are never given feedback on what they need to do better. So they are in a rut, and they're trying to figure out how they can get out and prosper. So I'm happy about the boot camp. I appreciate you bringing this information that we've talked about so we can see it for what it is and what we need to do to improve and not wait until later. Because you said it was urgency. We needed to look at it now. And so now that we have it and you have some things in place, I'm hopeful. And I hope that the staff that's listening are hopeful as well and know that they do have an opportunity to grow if they're willing to do the work.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But the bottom line, nobody wants to be given a job because of how they look. They want to be given an opportunity to get into a position that's better than where they currently are.
Yes, ma'am. Great point. Ms. Miller.
I think this has been a conversation, like you said, from the very beginning about succession planning. I think I'm 4 years into saying that's what we needed, because we need to also be transparent about what we're looking for. That way, if there is an interview, because I've heard that too, I've heard, well, I interviewed, but they already had someone in mind, or I didn't have that opportunity. That to know ahead of time, and I've even talked to people in the interview panels who were like, they kind of wanted this to go this direction. That's not good business. And so if we can be transparent on what we're looking for, and then the follow-up, and I know you've already addressed that, because I've had some people reach out to me that would call HR, wanting follow-up from HR, but really HR is the facilitator of the interview. HR needs to lead them back to their direct supervisor. But make sure our supervisors understand that is their job, to help these people move to the next level, and what that looks like, which I think we'll have with succession planning. To know this district is 58% Hispanic, and we have schools with nobody that speaks Spanish, with schools full of children who do. And I think a lot of this is we're so desperate for them in the classroom that we're probably not helping develop them, because who will be in that classroom that's bilingual? And so I don't know the answer to that, but I think we need to invest in especially that bilingual in the east area of the county, those bilingual schools that need not only teachers, but administrators that can help these students is very important. And I'm not sure where to begin doing that, but I think this is a huge improvement. And I'm looking forward to our district staff, or our teachers, even people that are already in the district, having a trajectory of where they could go in their job, what's available to them if they complete whatever coursework or supervisory roles needed. Because we do burn them out, and they leave, or they'll sit in AP roles forever, and we could have made them great principals, but they felt defeated, and so they don't try it again. So I think this is very important. I appreciate this coming up. I also love this book. Are you going to talk about this book?
I can.
Okay.
Just Mr. Wilson, then Dr. Allen, then back to Ms. Fortney, I believe.
So like my colleagues, I want to commend you on this. I think this is incredibly important. But I think, we talk about feedback, but it's not the feedback, it's how you do it, right? And you talked about that. It has to be done in a very positive way. And we know children learn in a positive learning environment, not a negative learning environment. Well, employees are the same way. They respond to a positive environment and positive feedback. So, I look forward to you modeling that for our district, and as you have all along. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Allen.
So speaking of the sandwich method, and I was curious on the flip side of that, if Mr. Green had ever said that to you.
Mr. Green has never included the bun. Mr. Green always goes right to the meat of the matter.
Yes.
There is no, having been on the receiving end of that in the past, I can assure you, there is no softening introduction. He gets right to the point. But I will tell you, what he modeled gets back to what Mr. Wilson just said. Holding someone accountable does not mean diminishing them as individuals and human beings. It creates an opportunity to challenge somebody to do better, to rise to the occasion. You do an injustice and a disservice to people when you sugarcoat it and you don't tell them explicitly what it is they've done wrong and what they can do better to improve that. And then you create the opportunities for them to be successful. So being candid does not mean being unprofessional or not being kind. And in this business nowadays, we have to work hard to keep people whole. And they have to see the value in the feedback that they're getting, and that the opportunity will present itself again for them to ultimately be successful. So I think that's an important part.
Yeah, indeed. And you said it well. This will impact positively our students. And as a parent, a senior 17-year-old, in that college discussion just this week, I'd mentioned Ida Lovelace to my daughter. And, I'm very familiar with Ida Lovelace and her impact on computational theory and so forth. And my daughter is interested in computer science, right? And, we recognize that there are not enough females and women in STEM. And, as we look at all the spreadsheets and so forth, the school that she's interested in, she noted, she's like, Dad, that school's only got, 20, 23, 24% females. And, and at the dinner table, she's, Dad, I'm a Christian feminist, just so you know. And it's just really fun, those conversations. But I will say this, Miss Stacy is her robotics and her AP computer science teacher. And that has influenced her in such a positive, dramatic way to have that female that's leading her towards a field that does not have a lot of women in that field. So I see what you're doing and really appreciate that and the impact that that will have on our students. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and per Ms. Miller's, Ms. Fortney.
Yeah, the useful and constructive feedback after the interview, however we can process that out. I know we have spoken about that numerous times. But also, just food for thought, maybe some sort of survey with your APs and your deans and even your principals on, because here's what I hear, and I'll just say it out loud. I hear that it's a numbers game. So we don't want to stand out so that nobody notices us in the district as having bad behavior, that kind of thing. It's not focused on what you just said per se by sight. So if you could get that feedback, that would be wonderful, I would think, to really find out, you know, A, they're not going to be scared to fill it out for repercussion, and B, you know, maybe you could get an idea of how many have thought about applying for something, did not because they already heard, why bother?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So per Ms. Miller's request, each board member received a handbook today. That is your principal's profile handbook. We'll also send you an electronic copy for those of you who don't want to carry this around. It is broken out. Unfortunately, we weren't able to number the tabs, but the first tab is Region 1. It subsequently goes through there. So you have every principal, but you also have your principals. You get a little bit of biographical information on each principal. I asked them to provide some little bit of insight as to themselves, type of music they listen to, books they read, hobbies. You get some good information about their school. I've always tried to provide this in the past, and this was something that I actually was provided when I first transitioned to Duval County Public Schools as the chief academic officer. You know, when you're starting to make the rounds, the last thing you want to do is assume someone's the principal and find out that they're really not the principal. And so, you know, when you're first transitioning, you're flipping through that book as you're pulling into a parking lot to, A, get a little bit of background about the school, get to know them personally, because the best introduction to someone isn't to walk in and say, hey, I'm Fred Hyde, I'm the new superintendent, you're the principal here. It's really to start out on a personal level. Hey, I saw that you have a family and you have 2 kids and they play sports, or you have dogs and your hobbies are such. Talk to me about that. It starts a whole other conversation, right? It starts on a positive note, and you're establishing a relationship, you're establishing a rapport that's more collegial rather than just supervisor to employee. And so there's a great opportunity for you. You have their birthdays. You do not have their birth year. That was a promise I gave them. So you have their date, their month of birth, and their day of birth. So you'll have to guess at their age. I know some of you I heard flipping through earlier saying, this is an old picture. And that could be. And this will be updated. We're going to try and modify it slightly. So each principal was asked to provide this. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer to put it together. We did have some other priorities and other issues taking up our time. But kudos to Jason, Ms. Winchester, and everybody else who helped us pull this together to verify we had everybody reflected. All new principal appointments are in here, with the exception of any open vacancies presently. And so you'll get those updated pages in the near future. But again, it gives you biographical information about them and a little bit about their schools. So if you're visiting, you know, keep it in your car. You can pop it open, look at it, and you know, I don't know if you're going to intend on sending any birthday notes to your principals, but I just gave you the opportunity, right? And you have their contact information and things like that. So I think it was important for you to hear from them and get to know them as the people serving in our schools. And so it's a great transition here. Thank you, Ms. Miller, for the opportunity to discuss that with you. But you have that, and hopefully you find it beneficial. If there's something missing and you'd like to see us add it to in the future, please let me know. Okay. Madam Chair, that concludes my portion of the workshop today.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. And I have a few quick updates before we go to our committee reports. So the first is you should have all gotten an email from Polk Vision this week that Thursday, April 28th from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. will be the State of the County. For the first time ever, they're including education as part of the State of the County. So Superintendent Hyde and I have been invited to speak with Commissioner Santiago and the county manager, as well as Joy from the Department of Health. So we would love to see you there. It's sure to be a great event, and there is also a Zoom electronic option as well. Evaluations. Thank you all for submitting your evaluations. They are all complete. I'll get with Yvette this week, and we'll make sure that we get a copy out to everyone. And then I'll be scheduling meetings within the next week or so to meet with both Carol and Wes to go over their evaluations. One of the things that actually Carol brought to my attention beforehand is that they had never seen the bullet points of information that we get of these may be good options for notes. And there were several of those that you may see the same bullet point in 4 different categories, which obviously if you're really great at that bullet point, then it's not a bad thing. But if it's something that you struggle with, you're gonna get hit with it 3 or 4 times. So after we look at the evaluations, I've asked both of them just to take a look at their evaluations, what the actual metric is, and make sure that it aligns with their job description, that they don't have anything that they're concerned about. I'm being evaluated on this and this really isn't something this position does, or this is gonna hit me 4 times.
It would be a not observed by us, basically.
Yes, correct. So I asked them just both to bring those to me when we review the evaluation, then I'll bring those back to the board if we have any recommendations to change them moving forward. Along those lines, I've now received from all of the staff that either report to us or report to someone who reports to us their job description updates. We mentioned last meeting, Superintendent Hyde is doing that globally, so we wanted to make sure that our staff members get included. Superintendent Hyde and I are in conversations about making sure that our staff are aligned to the full district staff, because it's a little bit of a weird situation in that we're one organization, but 10 people that work here report to us, and the other 13,000 plus report to the superintendent. So making sure that our positions are aligning with what we're doing with the rest of the district, and we'll bring those proposals to the work session on February 22nd. You looked like you were getting ready to say something.
No,
You
ma'am.
good? Okay. And then strategic planning date. We asked all of you to bring your calendars last time and then forgot to look at strategic planning dates. So Superintendent Hyde, let's do that. Are we looking for a half day? Is that what you?
I would suggest another half day.
Okay.
I know their request previously was mornings worked, for the collective group, mornings seemed to work better. And then the request was to start at 9 a.m. versus an 8 a.m. start if we were to do that again. I believe only, correct me if I'm wrong, either Dr. Allen or Mr. Wilson had a conflict with early mornings, depending on the day, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Was it Tuesdays you had a conflict on? Okay.
Tuesday, Thursdays typically.
So Superintendent Hyde, I think your schedule is probably the busiest of us. Do you want to, or Wendy, do you have a date that?
The 7th works of March, if we want to look that far out. I know most of the board appreciates several weeks' notice because you're very busy. So Monday, March 7th works on my calendar. With all due respect, we'll accommodate whatever the needs are. We have a work session on the 8th. I could make the 9th work. We have a groundbreaking on the 10th, so we could do an afternoon session on the 10th, if that would work. And then, those are several dates for that second week of March, if that works for the board. I don't know if we want to start there.
So do we want to look at March 7th first?
Yes. I'm good.
I cannot do March 7th.
We cannot do March 7th.
No, I'm already booked.
I cannot do the 9th. I have leadership Polk that day. The 10th,
10th works for me.
I can't do the 10th.
what about the 11th, Superintendent Hyde?
I could make the 11th work. Ms. Yocum will be upset with me, but I can make the 11th work.
In the morning?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, the morning would work fine.
Thank you, Ms.
Morning or
Yocum.
afternoon works for me on the 11th.
It needs to be morning, not after.
Needs to be morning? Yes, ma'am.
So like 9 to 1 on the 11th?
Perfect.
Anybody speaking now or forever hold your peace?
I will move my schedule because that works for me.
Okay.
I will be here most of the time, but I have a VA
I think we can get the bulk of items done in time for Mr. Wilson to,
Okay,
I have a equity committee meeting at 10:30, but I'll just step out.
yes, ma'am.
and Superintendent Hyde, will you get with Kim? I'm assuming Kim needs to be here as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I did check the date with her, and she said she didn't think she had a conflict, but she was gonna
Perfect.
double check, so.
We'll
But
follow
if you'll
up with
circle
her
back with
today.
her.
So that is the 11th from 9 to 1.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, we'll try to get the public notice out.
And we will make sure that lunch is here. Who knows, maybe we'll get the George Jenkins barbecue team.
And location, I'm assuming, will be dependent on whether or not we're back in the boardroom, so that will be forthcoming, but it
Yeah,
will either be here or
this
the
Friday, I'll give
district
you another
office.
update. We're waiting on the technical equipment. Some has been delivered, some we're still waiting on. And as soon as that arrives, the installer from Tampa will come over and begin the process, but I'll get you an update as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
And actually, we could host it there. We would just have to figure out with Jason how to record that work session, but we might be able to accommodate central office if need be.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing I have is I've had the opportunity to be in Tallahassee with Miss Dodge a couple times over the past few weeks, and she is a powerhouse, and I'm really glad that we were able to retain her again this year because it is amazing how much she knows, and other districts realize it. When you have other board members going to ask your legislative person questions because they want the right answer, and she knows it all. So I'm not really sure the story behind the huge pencil that was traveling with us last week, but I'm sure Dr. Allen will probably give you a little bit of that update in his report. But does anyone have updates from their committees?
We did not meet.
FSBA have any update?
The Board of Directors really was centered around legislative posturing, et cetera, what could possibly come down the pike. They are in the process of creating a new National School Board Association. FSBA will be a founding member of that board. We did a equity and diversity training it was a part 2 from our Board of Directors meeting in Fort Myers, which was very good. That basically talked about model companies, and it's not just words you put on there about equity and diversity, it's how you actually follow through with that, and your actions speak much louder than your mission statement if you don't follow through with that. And that was about it for, I believe.
And just confirming, the new national organization is not the National School Board Association. It's a coalition or something.
Yes.
It's called something different.
And
It's
I
totally separate.
apologize, I did not bring my notes, and I had them.
I
There
just
is
wanted to reiterate that it is
Yeah.
totally separate from the one that was in the news earlier this
Actually,
year.
the Florida School Board Association has withdrawn its membership from the National School Board Association, and they are, along with, I believe, 23 other states, going to build their own coalition of, and a national platform, because we still, I guess, felt like we needed input and understanding of federal guidelines, federal-type training, et cetera. And I believe Bev Slough is going to be the representative for that new coalition as well. She's out of St. John's County, I
Sounds
believe.
right.
All right, that's it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ms. Miller?
I'm going to mention, because I talked about it all in Tallahassee and recruited all kinds of people, the Polk Education Foundation, I've also recruited the superintendent and maybe his wife. Polk Education Foundation is having a new fundraiser we've never done in Polk County. It's a clay shoot at night, but it's getting a lot of attention, and it's going to raise a lot of money for our students. So I'm excited to attend that on March 4th, and you're welcome to come and watch if you don't shoot clays or you don't shoot them at night. I've never done that, but it will be a great time to be with our community partners and help support students. Right, Mr. Hyde? You're going to shoot clays.
I thought we were going to
I
have
thought-
a school board team.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're going to work on if the school board members would like, we did discuss having a school board team. I'm not sure what our results would be, but it would be a good effort for kids to see us.
Mrs. Hyde will be there as well.
I'm excited. So that's all we had at Polk Education Foundation. And I'll let Dr. Allen speak of the giant pencil we carried around. It was a great time to be in Tallahassee. I kind of prefer, I would hope Polk Days would fall closer to that FSBA conference, because I think once we visit in Polk Days and get to meet with our community members there at the Capitol, to go back another week, just a week later, and I know that's not our scheduling. I just think the board members that weren't able to make it to Polk Days, I think that's much more effective, because you get to be around other members from Polk County, elected officials, as well as lobbyists and people that work in government, and the conversations from that are very beneficial. But I know we don't schedule those, so hopefully it will fall closer, if not in the same week next year. Dr. Allen, I'm sure you have input.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I was thinking more of the banter that you guys were having over there on that side about the hogs at the youth fair. I think the 401 exhibitors. And it reminded me of the opportunity to be able to share kielbasa and bacon with you while we're in Tallahassee. Miss Fortney. So really, no, I mean, Tallahassee was...
I didn't have to go kill it, okay? Jesus.
But it was really a great opportunity for us to roam the halls and to interact with our legislation alongside Whitney Dodge. You know, she did just push out her summary from her time up there, and she is really magical. I mean, the way that she understands each of our delegates and will address particular bills and the impact that those bills have on our district, it was really neat to see her work and do her magic there. Not necessarily magic, but, you know, she was just working it really well. Yeah, so the pencil is there. It's a symbol of creativity. And if you want to know anything about the pencil, Ms. Fields, I could give you all the history of the pencil. I do have a feature documentary on the pencil that's out there. I don't know if you knew that. But I love taking it out into the classroom, and, you know, the kids just get all excited about it. And then on occasion, I'll talk about the history of the pencil. It really did change society in dramatic ways. So there you go. I almost brought it as a background prop today, but I held back. But we'll see.
It's not still in your car?
It actually says Polk County Public Schools on it, though, correct?
It does, absolutely. And it was moving around the streets in Tallahassee. Everybody needs to know about Polk County. And speaking of, we did sit in on one of the committees, the House Pre-K through 12 Educational Subcommittee, and it was really interesting. They have a new allocation called Putting Parents First allocation, and it was in the summary. Who knows? It's got a long ways to go, but it was a $200 million allocation. And my understanding from Wendy Dodge's summary is if that actually went through, Polk County would get $106 million.
118.
Oh, 118. Wow. So quite interesting one to follow. So those are a couple of my updates. Thank you, Madam Chair.
But can I add something to that? But that $200 million comes on the backs of the 12 districts that stood by their parental rights because they voted for a mask mandate, and their parents in their districts wanted their kids to wear masks. And so, you know, we're actually going to maybe benefit from their misery, which I can't think it can be good on that side of history.
Right. And just to be a part of that conversation was intriguing to watch. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have one thing.
Yes, Ms. Fields.
Thank you for coordinating the evaluations. I wanted to know in the future for whoever sits in these seats, if we're going to be using that format, that we can put as a part of the directions that in order for us to access the documents, we have to wait to get permission from the office staff to give us that permission? I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, ma'am. There were several things that I think Ms. Yvette and I learned, and we have noted all of those so that they'll be moving forward if we're able to use the same format. It's already created, so that it'll be a much smoother rollout
Well, she did great, but I didn't realize that that was something that I had to wait on, because I do a lot of my work late at night or early mornings.
Right.
And so, just as long as it's made known to whoever is gonna be doing it in the future.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, one of the things Yvette and I have been working on is every time, because of course, this is the first time going around of everything for that office. So as they're doing each new thing, making sure that they're adding it to a binder so that as we move on, you know, in 50 years when she's not here with us anymore, she'll have someone to pass all of that on to so we don't
Procedures
lose
manual,
the content as we're updating procedures.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, with no further business to come before the board, this work session is adjourned.
There is lunch next door.